Millionaire loses his wife and her baby. Now he desperately hires her to breastfeed his child. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew that answering that call would change everything, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. Melissa Renee Clark stared at her cracked iPhone 8 screen, watching the notification from Venmo pop up. Rent payment overdue, 847 $. The golden highlights in her elegant braids caught the fluorescent light of the Brewhaven coffee shop as she wiped down the same counter for the third time that morning. Her dark brown eyes, usually bright with sarcasm, looked tired today. "Another double-shot Americano," she called out, forcing energy into her voice that she didn't feel. The customer, a woman in yoga pants scrolling through Instagram, barely looked up as she grabbed her drink. Melissa watched her walk away, probably heading to some perfect suburban life that existed only in social media posts. The bell above the door chimed, and Melissa's shoulders automatically straightened. Keep smiling, keep working, keep surviving. That's what Dr. Martinez had told her during their last session. The sertralina from Walgreens was supposed to help with the fog in her head, but some mornings still felt like swimming through concrete. She opened her Dailyo app quickly, tapping the OK mood emoji. Not great, not terrible, just okay. That seemed to be her default setting these days. The morning rush had been brutal. Her manager, Derek, kept shooting her looks every time she moved a little slower than usual. Her Converse sneakers were already killing her feet, and it wasn't even noon. The medical bills sitting in her small Wicker Park apartment felt like they were calling her name, each one a reminder of everything she'd lost. Stop thinking about it, she told herself, the same mantra she'd been using for months. A text from her friend Janae popped up. "Girl, saw your ex at Whole Foods with some new chick. You dodging my calls again?" Melissa swiped the message away without responding. She wasn't ready for Janae's well-meaning pep talks about getting back out there, and healing takes time. Some wounds were too fresh for motivational quotes. The steam wand hissed as she prepared another latte, her silver bracelet, the one her mother had given her before she passed, catching on her uniform sleeve. She adjusted it carefully. It was one of the few beautiful things she had left. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deeper than the usual customer chatter, with an edge of desperation that made Melissa look up. A tall man stood at the counter, and what struck her first wasn't his perfectly styled brown hair or his expensive Banana Republic shirt. It was the way he held the baby. The infant was crying. Not the gentle fussing she'd heard from other customers, children, but the kind of desperate wailing that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. The man's blue-gray eyes looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "I'm sorry," he said, shifting the baby awkwardly. "I know this is unusual, but I really need help. His name is Anthony Gabriel, and this is my son, Brian." His voice cracked slightly on the word son. "I've tried everything. Formula, different bottles, the expensive Dr. Brown's ones everyone recommends. Nothing works." Melissa found herself walking around the counter before she realized what she was doing. The baby's cries seemed to echo in her chest, awakening something she'd been trying to bury for months. "How old is he?" she asked softly, her hands instinctively reaching toward the child. 6 months, Anthony replied, his relief visible as she gently took Brian. "His mother, she died during childbirth. I've been raising him alone, and I'm failing." The moment Brian settled against Melissa's chest, something shifted. His cries softened to whimpers, then to silence. Her body remembered what her mind was trying to forget. The weight of a baby, the trust, the need. Anthony stared at her with wonder. "How did you—" Melissa felt tears threatening to fall as she looked down at Brian's blue-gray eyes, so much like his father's. She knew she should hand him back, should return to her coffee counter and her safe, numb routine. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "I think I can help you." But what she didn't tell him was that helping him might destroy the careful walls she'd built around her broken heart. 3 days later, Melissa stood outside a glass tower in downtown Chicago, questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. The address Anthony had texted her on WhatsApp seemed impossible, the kind of building where people in $1,000 suits disappeared into elevators that probably cost more than her annual salary. She adjusted her gold hoop earrings nervously, smoothing down her best H&M blouse. Her reflection in the building's windows showed a woman trying too hard to look like she belonged. Apartment 4207, "Just tell security you're here for Brian Gabriel," his message had read, followed by a simple, "Thank you." Those 2 words had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. The security guard, a middle-aged black man with kind eyes, smiled when she mentioned Brian's name. "Oh, you must be the lady Mr. Gabriel's been waiting for. That baby's been keeping the whole floor up," he chuckled, handing her a visitor's badge. "Elevator bank C, all the way up." As the elevator climbed, Melissa's phone buzzed with notifications she'd been ignoring. Janae had sent 17 messages since yesterday, ranging from concerned to annoyed. Her boss Derek had called twice about shift coverage. 3 different collection agencies had left voicemails that she'd deleted without listening to. But Brian's face kept floating in her mind, those blue-grey eyes that had looked at her with complete trust, the way his tiny fingers had wrapped around hers. Her body had responded to his need in a way that terrified and comforted her simultaneously. The elevator opened to a hallway that smelled like expensive candles and success. Apartment 4207 had double doors, actual double doors, like in the movies. Before she could knock, one door swung open. Anthony stood there in a wrinkled Patagonia sweatshirt, his usually perfect hair sticking up at odd angles. Dark circles under his eyes made him look older than his 34 years. "Melissa," he breathed, relief flooding his voice. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." Behind him, she could hear Brian crying, that same desperate wail from the coffee shop. The sound went straight through her like electricity. "Sorry, I almost did," she admitted, stepping inside. The apartment was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her car, but it felt cold, unlived in, like a magazine spread rather than a home. Anthony ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time since you left the shop. I've tried everything, different formulas, those expensive organic ones from Whole Foods, even called 3 different pediatricians. Nothing works." Brian's cries grew louder from what she assumed was the nursery. Without thinking, Melissa walked toward the sound, her practical nature taking over. "Show me his routine," she said. The nursery was perfect, like everything else in Anthony's world appeared to be. Soft greys and whites, a crib that probably cost more than most people's rent, shelves lined with organic everything. But Brian lay in his Carter's onesie, red-faced and inconsolable, his tiny fists waving in frustration. Melissa felt her chest tighten with familiar recognition. "When did he last eat?" "An hour ago, maybe 2. Anthony's voice cracked with exhaustion. "Time kind of blurs together when you're not sleeping." She picked up Brian gently, feeling that same immediate settling she'd experienced at the coffee shop. His cries softened to whimpers as she held him against her chest, swaying slightly. "He's not hungry," she said softly. "He's scared." Anthony stared at her. "Scared. Babies can sense when the people caring for them are stressed," Melissa explained, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're running on empty. He can feel that energy. It's making him anxious." The room fell quiet except for Brian's gradually calming breaths. Anthony sank into the expensive nursing chair, covering his face with his hands. "I'm failing him," he whispered. "Elena would have known what to do. She had all these books, took every class. I was supposed to be the provider. She was supposed to be—" His voice broke. Melissa felt something crack open in her chest, not the careful numbness she'd cultivated, but something warmer and more dangerous. "You're not failing him," she said quietly. "You're just learning." Anthony looked up at her, his blue-grey eyes so similar to his son's. "Will you help us? I know it's unusual, and I can pay whatever you need. My company just secured another round of funding, and How much?" The practical question slipped out before she could stop it. "Whatever you're making at the coffee shop, I'll triple it." Melissa's mind raced. Triple her salary would cover her medical bills, her rent, maybe even let her breathe for the first time in months. But holding Brian felt like walking through a minefield of memories she wasn't ready to face. Her phone buzzed with another notification, probably another overdue bill. She looked down at Brian, now peaceful in her arms, his tiny hand gripping her finger with surprising strength. "I need to know something first," she said, meeting Anthony's desperate gaze. What happened to his mother really happened. The silence that followed told her she wasn't prepared for the truth she was about to hear. Anthony's hands trembled as he reached for the framed photo on Brian's dresser, and Melissa realized she wasn't ready for what he was about to reveal. "Elena was perfect," Anthony began, his voice barely above a whisper. The photo showed a beautiful Latina woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "We met at Northwestern. She was finishing her master's in education. I was drowning in my startup. She used to joke that I lived on energy drinks and impossible dreams." Melissa shifted Brian gently in her arms, feeling the weight of the story she was about to hear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline stretched endlessly, but the apartment felt smaller somehow, filled with grief that hadn't been spoken aloud. "The pregnancy was perfect, too," Anthony continued, setting the photo down with careful precision. "Every appointment, every ultrasound. She did yoga, ate organic everything from that expensive place on North Avenue, read to him every night." His Apple Watch buzzed with a Slack notification, but he ignored it completely. She had this playlist on Spotify, classical music mixed with Spanish lullabies her grandmother used to sing. Brian made a soft sound against Melissa's chest, and she found herself swaying automatically, her silver bracelet catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Oh, what happened?" she asked gently, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Anthony walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. "Labor started normally. We went to Northwestern Memorial, the best hospital in the city." She was excited, texting her sister updates, posting on Instagram about finally meeting our little miracle. His voice cracked on the last words. Melissa felt her own chest tighten, memories threatening to surface that she'd worked so hard to bury. She focused on Brian's breathing, steady and trusting against her. 22 hours of labor, Anthony continued. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. Placental abruption. The doctors moved so fast, I barely understood what was happening. 1 minute Elena was squeezing my hand, laughing about how Brian was taking his time like his father. The next minute, alarms were going off and they were rushing her to surgery. The apartment felt heavy with silence, except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic below. "They saved Brian," Anthony said, turning from the window. His blue-gray eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But Elena, she hemorrhaged. They couldn't stop the bleeding. I held her hand as she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Melissa closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. She knew that kind of loss. Different circumstances, but the same hollow ache that followed you everywhere. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The worst part was coming home," Anthony continued, his voice stronger now, like he needed to get it all out. "The nursery was ready. The fridge was full of casseroles from Elena's friends, and I had this perfect baby who needed me to be perfect too. But I couldn't even figure out how to work the bottle warmer she'd registered for at Target." Brian stirred in Melissa's arms, making soft baby sounds that seemed to fill the space between their pain. She looked down at his peaceful face. Elena's son, Anthony's miracle, a child born from love and loss in equal measure. "Elena's family blames me," Anthony said quietly. "Her mother won't return my calls. Her sister blocked me on Instagram after I posted a photo of Brian on his 3-month birthday. They think I should have done more, should have insisted on a C-section earlier, should have been a better advocate." "And you blame yourself too," Melissa said. "It wasn't a question." Anthony nodded, sinking into the expensive nursing chair that probably Eleanor had picked out, dreaming of rocking her son to sleep. "Every day, I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently. Maybe if I hadn't been checking my phone during contractions, maybe if I'd pushed the doctors harder when she said something felt wrong." Melissa understood that kind of guilt, the endless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys that could consume you if you let them. Her own loss had come with its own catalogue of self-blame. "Is that why you avoid social media?" she asked. "Just can't handle seeing other people's perfect families," Anthony admitted. "Elena used to love Instagram. She had this account where she posted about teaching and pregnancy. Her last post was a picture of the hospital bag, captioned, 'Ready to meet our little man.' It got 300 likes and dozens of comments about how excited everyone was." Brian chose that moment to open his eyes, looking up at Melissa with that serious expression babies get when they're taking in the world. She felt something shift inside her chest, not the careful numbness she'd maintained, but something warmer and more frightening. "He has her eyes," she said softly. "So everyone says that," Anthony replied, "but sometimes I look at him and I see her smile, or the way she used to scrunch her nose when she was thinking." Melissa's phone buzzed with another text from Janae. "Girl, where are you? Derek's been calling about your shifts." Reality crashed back in. Her life outside these expensive walls, the bills waiting in her apartment, the job she couldn't afford to lose. "Anthony," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "if I do this, if I help you with Brian, I need you to understand something about me too." Melissa's words hung in the air like a confession she'd never planned to make, and Anthony could see the pain she'd been hiding behind her sarcastic smile. Brian had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with perfect trust. Melissa looked down at him, her dark brown eyes reflecting something Anthony hadn't seen before. Not just compassion, but recognition, the kind that comes from walking through your own version of hell. "I lost a baby too," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the city below. 7 months ago. Anthony felt his breath catch. The way she'd held Brian so naturally, the immediate calm that seemed to radiate from her when she touched him, it all made terrible, beautiful sense now. "His name was Marcus," Melissa continued, her gold hoop earrings catching the light as she shook her head slightly. "He was born at 28 weeks. Premature rupture of membranes, they called it. Medical terminology for your body failed when it mattered most." She shifted Brian gently, and Anthony noticed how her silver bracelet, her mother's bracelet she'd mentioned, seemed to give her strength as she touched it. "He lived for 6 days, she whispered. 6 days in the NICU at University of Chicago Medical Center. Tubes and wires everywhere, machines beeping constantly. I couldn't hold him properly because of all the equipment, but I could touch his tiny hand through the incubator." Anthony sank deeper into the nursing chair, Elena's chair, feeling the weight of shared grief settling between them. He understood now why Melissa had seemed to recognize something in Brian's cries, in his need. "My husband couldn't handle it," Melissa continued, her voice growing stronger, like telling the story was pulling something out of her that needed to be released. "Marcus dying, the medical bills, me falling apart. He filed for divorce while I was still getting bills from the funeral home. Said he needed space to process and couldn't handle my depression." "Jesus," Anthony breathed. "The medical bills destroyed my credit," she said, a bitter laugh escaping. "So even with insurance, the NICU stay cost more than most people make in 2 years. That's why I'm working at the coffee shop, why I take extra shifts, why my phone is constantly buzzing with collection calls I can't answer." Brian stirred slightly in her arms, and she automatically began that gentle swaying motion that seemed to come from muscle memory. "After Marcus died, my body," she paused, searching for the right words. "It didn't understand that he was gone. I was still producing milk for a baby who would never need it. The doctors gave me medication to stop it, but sometimes when I hold Brian, it's like my body remembers what it was made to do." Anthony felt tears threatening. "Melissa, I had no idea. When I asked you to help, I didn't know." "That's why I can help him," she interrupted gently. "Brian needs what my body is still trying to give. And maybe," she looked down at the sleeping baby, "maybe I need him too." The apartment felt different now, less like a showcase and more like a sanctuary where two broken people had found each other through an impossible circumstance. "Is that why you stopped going to church?" Anthony asked, remembering how she'd mentioned her faith at the coffee shop. Melissa nodded. "Pastor Williams kept talking about God's plan, about how everything happens for a reason. I wanted to scream at him that there was no good reason for Marcus to die, no lesson worth learning from watching your child suffer." She paused. "But sometimes, when I hold Brian, I hear the hymns in my head. Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art, the songs my grandmother used to sing when I was scared." Anthony's phone buzzed with notifications he continued to ignore, his team at the startup probably wondering why he'd missed 3 meetings today. But sitting here, watching Melissa hold his son with such tender understanding, he realized he'd been approaching everything wrong. "I've been trying to be perfect," he said quietly, "for Brian, for Elena's memory. I thought if I could just figure out the right formula, the right schedule, the right everything, I could somehow make up for the fact that he doesn't have his mother." "Babies don't need perfect," Melissa said, adjusting Brian's position with practiced ease. "They need present. They need someone who shows up even when it's hard, even when you're scared you're doing it wrong." Her phone buzzed again. Derek from the coffee shop, probably wondering where she was. The real world existed outside Anthony's expensive windows, with its bills and obligations and people who didn't understand that sometimes healing requires taking risks that look insane from the outside. "If I do this," Melissa said, meeting Anthony's eyes, "I need some rules. I keep my apartment, my independence. This is about helping Brian, not about me becoming some live-in nanny from a romance novel." Anthony nodded quickly. "Of course. Whatever you need. And I need you to understand that some days will be harder than others. Grief isn't linear, and neither is healing." "I understand," he said, though he wasn't sure he completely did. Brian chose that moment to wake up, his blue-gray eyes opening slowly, focusing on Melissa's face with that serious baby expression. He made a soft sound, not crying, just acknowledging her presence. "Hey there, little man," she whispered, and Anthony watched his son's face transform into something that might have been a smile. "I think," Melissa said softly, "we're all going to learn something from each other." But what none of them knew was that learning to trust again would test them in ways they never imagined. 2 weeks later, Melissa discovered that some routines save you, and others slowly break down the walls you've built around your heart. The alarm on her cracked iPhone 8 buzzed at 6:30 a.m., but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her small Wicker Park apartment. Her Google Calendar showed today's schedule: Brian 8 a.m., 12 p.m., Brewhaven 2 p.m., 8 p.m. The new routine was exhausting, but for the first time in months, her Dialio app showed more green, good days than grey okay ones. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through the WhatsApp messages from Anthony that had come in during the night. A photo of Brian at 3 a.m. with the caption, "Couldn't sleep, but look at this face." Another at 5:15 a.m. "He's asking for you, I think." And finally, "Thank you for yesterday, see you at 8. Those messages had become her favorite part of waking up, though she'd never admit it. Melissa pulled on her favorite jeans and a soft sweater from Target, checking her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her braids looked good. She'd gotten them redone at Janet's cousin's salon in Bronzeville last weekend, the blonde tips freshly touched up. Her gold hoops caught the morning light filtering through her small window. The 20-minute bus ride to Anthony's building had become a meditation of sorts. She'd put in her earbuds and listened to gospel music, Tasha Cobbs, Kirk Franklin, sometimes her grandmother's old Mahalia Jackson recordings. The music filled the spaces in her chest that had been empty for so long. "Morning, Miss Clark," the security guard, Robert, called out as she entered the lobby. "How's our little man doing?" "Growing like a weed," she replied, genuinely smiling. It still surprised her how easily the smiles came now. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor used to make her nervous. Now it felt like coming home to something she hadn't known she was missing. Anthony opened the door before she could knock, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing a Northwestern University t-shirt and pajama pants. The casual version of him had become her favorite, less polished, more real. "He's been fussy since 5 a.m., Anthony said, stepping aside to let her in. "I tried everything, the swing, the white noise machine, even that playlist Elena made. Nothing worked." Melissa could hear Brian's cries from the nursery, but they didn't sound distressed anymore. They sounded like calls for her specifically. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, that familiar tightening in her chest that meant her milk was ready. "Good morning, sweet boy," she murmured, lifting Brian from his crib. He was wearing a Carter's onesie with little dinosaurs. Anthony's choice, she could tell. Elena probably would have picked something more sophisticated. The moment Brian felt her arms around him, his cries softened to whimpers, then to the contented sounds that meant he felt safe. Melissa settled into the nursing chair, the expensive one that had become hers by default, and began to feed him. Anthony lingered in the doorway, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He loves you," he said quietly. "I love him too," she replied, surprised by how easily the words came. 3 months ago, she couldn't imagine loving anything again. Now this little boy had somehow crept past all her defenses. "Coffee?" Anthony asked, the question that had become their morning ritual. "Please." 2 sugars. Splash of oat milk. She heard him moving around the kitchen, the sound of the expensive espresso machine he'd bought but never learned to use properly. These small domestic moments had become precious to her. Proof that she could still be part of something, still be needed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janae. "Girl, you've been glowing lately. What's his name?" Melissa smiled, typing back, "His name is Brian. He's 6 months old and he's teaching me how to be happy again." Janae's response was immediate. "Boy, you know what I mean, but I'm glad you're smiling. Bring him by the shop sometime." Anthony returned with 2 mugs, hers in a ceramic cup from some tech conference, his in a Northwestern mug that had seen better days. He'd learned to make her coffee exactly how she liked it, which felt more intimate than it should have. "I have to ask you something," he said, settling into the other chair in the nursery. "My company is hosting a small gathering next Friday. Nothing fancy, just dinner with some investors. But I was wondering if you and Brian might come with me." Melissa looked up from Brian, surprised, like a date. Anthony ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as nervous energy. Like I don't want to spend another evening making small talk about market projections when I could be home with the two people who matter most to me. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the morning light streaming through the nursery windows. Melissa felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with Brian's feeding schedule. Anthony, she said carefully, we agreed this was about helping Brian. I'm not looking for anything complicated. I know, he said quickly. I know we did, but Melissa, these past 2 weeks, I haven't felt this alive since before Elena died, and I hope, that maybe you feel something too. Brian had finished eating and was now looking between them with that serious baby expression, as if he understood the weight of the conversation happening above his head. Melissa shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently while she gathered her thoughts. I feel something, she admitted quietly, but I'm scared. My last relationship ended with divorce papers and a broken heart. I don't know if I'm ready to risk that again. Anthony leaned forward, his blue-gray eyes earnest. I'm not asking you to risk anything. I'm asking you to consider that maybe we're both healing, and maybe we're healing together for a reason. Before Melissa could answer, Brian made a sound that seemed to say everything she couldn't find words for, and she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe in something beautiful again. Friday night arrived faster than Melissa's courage could catch up, and she found herself standing in front of her closet mirror, questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. The black dress from H&M hung perfectly on her curves, the one she'd bought 2 years ago for a work Christmas party she'd ended up skipping. Her braids were pulled back into an elegant low bun, the blonde tips creating a subtle halo effect. She'd borrowed Janet's good jewelry, delicate gold earrings and a matching necklace that made her feel like someone who belonged in Anthony's world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. Car's downstairs whenever you're ready. Brian's being an angel in his tiny suit. She smiled despite her nerves. Anthony had insisted on getting Brian a miniature navy blazer from Baby Gap, claiming his son needed to look investor-ready. The image of 6-month-old Brian in formal wear had been melting her heart all week. Another message popped up, this one from Janet. Girl, send pics. And remember, you deserve good things. Melissa stared at her reflection one more time. The woman looking back at her seemed different from the one who'd been surviving on sarcasm and sertralina just a month ago. This woman looked hopeful. It was terrifying. The ride to the restaurant in Anthony's Tesla Model Y felt like floating. Brian sat in his car seat between them, babbling happily and grabbing at everything within reach. He'd grown so much in their weeks together, more alert, more responsive, more trusting. When he looked at her now, his blue-gray eyes lit up with recognition that made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to belonging. Nervous? Anthony asked, his hand briefly touching hers as he adjusted the car's climate control. Terrified, she admitted. I've never been to a business dinner. What if I say something wrong? What if they ask about my job at the coffee shop and realize I don't belong here? Anthony pulled into the valet area of Millionaire, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. The building looked like something from a magazine, all glass and steel and impossibly elegant people walking through its doors. Melissa, Anthony said, turning to face her fully, you're brilliant. You're raising my son like he's your own, and you make me laugh every single day. If they can't see how incredible you are, that's their problem, not yours. The valet opened her door before she could respond, and suddenly she was stepping onto Michigan Avenue in borrowed jewelry and her best dress, holding a baby who trusted her completely, while the man she was falling for introduced her to his world. The private dining room was intimidating. 12 people in suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent, talking about market disruption and sustainable energy solutions. Anthony's hand found the small of her back as he guided her around the room, introducing her simply as Melissa, who's been helping with Brian. She noticed he didn't say babysitter or nanny, just Melissa, like she mattered. Brian was a hit, charming everyone with his serious expressions and occasional baby babble. One of the investors, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, spent 20 minutes talking to Melissa about child development, while Brian sat contentedly in her lap. He's lucky to have you, the woman said. You can tell he feels secure. That doesn't happen by accident. Melissa felt something warm bloom in her chest. For so long, she'd defined herself by her failures. The baby she couldn't save, the marriage she couldn't hold together, the bills she couldn't pay. But here, holding Brian while intelligent people discussed changing the world, she felt capable again. The dinner conversation flowed between renewable energy patents and funding rounds, topics that should have made her feel out of place. Instead, she found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about Anthony's work that she'd never thought to ask before. "So your company designs solar panels for urban environments?" she asked during dessert. "Solar collection systems integrated into building materials," Anthony explained, his eyes lighting up the way they did when he talked about something he loved. "The idea is to make every surface energy productive without changing the aesthetic of the building, like the windows could generate power." "Exactly," he smiled at her in a way that made her stomach flutter. "Eleanor used to say I talked about it too much, but you actually seem interested." The comment slipped out without thought, and Melissa saw Anthony's face change slightly. Not sadness, exactly, but recognition of how different this was from what he'd had before. After dinner, they walked along the lakefront, Brian sleeping peacefully in his stroller. The Chicago skyline glittered across the water, and Melissa felt like she was living someone else's life, the kind of life she'd seen in movies, but never imagined for herself. "Thank you," Anthony said as they sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan. Tonight felt normal, like we were a family going to dinner together. "We're not a family," Melissa said automatically, the words sharper than she'd intended. Anthony was quiet for a moment, watching the waves lap against the shore. "What are we then?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and fear in equal measure. Melissa looked down at Brian, sleeping so peacefully in his tiny blazer, his little fist curled around her finger even in sleep. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know I love him. I know being with both of you makes me feel like myself again, the version of myself I was before everything fell apart. And I know," Anthony said quietly, "that when I picture Brian's future, you're in it. When I think about coming home from work, I imagine both of you there. When I think about bedtime stories and first steps and birthday parties, I can't imagine them without you." Melissa felt tears threatening, the good kind that come when something broken starts to heal. "Anthony, I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know that whatever this is between us, it's real for me. You're not just helping with Brian, you're helping me remember what it feels like to hope for something." Brian stirred in his stroller, making soft baby sounds without waking up. The sound made them both smile, this tiny person who had brought them together in the most unexpected way. "I need to tell you something," Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm starting to hope for something too. And that scares me more than anything." But what scared her even more was the realization that she might already be too deep to turn back now. 3 weeks after the dinner, Melissa thought she had everything under control, until one exhausting Tuesday morning, when everything she'd carefully balanced came crashing down. The day started wrong from the moment her alarm failed to go off. Her iPhone 8's battery had died overnight, and she woke up at 7:45 a.m. to Derek from Brew Haven pounding on her apartment door. "Melissa, you were supposed to open this morning." His voice carried through the thin walls of her Wicker Park building. "We've got a line of customers and no one to work the espresso machine." She stumbled to the door in her pajamas, her braids messy from sleep. "Derek, I'm so sorry. My phone died, and I have to be at Anthony's in 15 minutes. Brian has his pediatrician appointment." "I don't care about your babysitting gig," Derek snapped, his face red with frustration. "You work for me, remember? The coffee shop that actually pays your salary." Melissa felt her chest tighten with familiar anxiety. She'd been juggling both jobs for weeks, but lately her heart had been more invested in Brian's schedule than her shifts at Brew Haven. The realization hit her like cold water. She was in danger of losing the job that kept her independent. "Give me 5 minutes," she said, already reaching for her clothes. "I'll call Anthony and explain." But when she tried calling Anthony's number, it went straight to voicemail. He was probably already in his morning meeting with potential investors from California, the big presentation he'd been preparing for all week. She fired off a quick WhatsApp message. "Emergency at work. Running 2 hours late. So sorry. Brian's appointment is at 11. Can you handle it?" The response came back immediately. "Mel, I can't. This meeting determines our next funding round. I need you." Her hands shook as she pulled on her Converse and grabbed her keys. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, being caught between two worlds, failing at both. The morning at Brew Haven was brutal. Derek made pointed comments about reliability and commitment, while she worked through the breakfast rush with a fake smile. Her regular customers noticed her distraction, and she spilled a latte on Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for her usual decaf with extra foam. "I'm so sorry," Melissa said, grabbing paper towels while Mrs. Patterson shook coffee off her coat. "Honey, you seem stressed," the older woman said kindly. "Everything all right?" Melissa felt tears threatening. Just trying to keep all the pieces together. By 10:30 a.m., she was finally free to leave for Anthony's apartment. She caught the first bus to downtown, checking her phone obsessively. 3 missed calls from Anthony, 2 voicemails she didn't have time to listen to, and a series of increasingly frantic WhatsApp messages. "Mel, where are you? Brian's been crying for an hour. I tried the bottle, but he won't take it. The investors moved the meeting to 1 p.m. Please tell me you're close. I don't know what to do. He needs you." The last message made her heart break a little. Anthony, who could negotiate million-dollar deals and revolutionize sustainable energy, was helpless when it came to his own son's basic needs. She arrived at his building at 11:15 a.m., her hair escaping from its ponytail, her Brewhaven uniform stained with coffee and stress sweat. Robert, the security guard, took one look at her and fast-tracked her to the elevator. "Rough morning, Miss Clark?" "You could say that," she replied, trying to catch her breath. She could hear Brian crying before Anthony even opened the door. When he did, she saw a man at the end of his rope, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his blue-gray eyes. "Thank God," he breathed, stepping aside to let her in. I was starting to panic. The pediatrician's office called twice asking if we were still coming. Brian was in his bouncy seat in the living room, his face red from crying, his little fists waving in frustration. The moment he saw Melissa, his cries changed pitch, less distressed, more demanding, like he was scolding her for being late. "I know, baby," she murmured, scooping him up. "Mama's here now." The word slipped out before she could stop it. "Mama? Not Melissa's here or I'm here? Mama." Anthony heard it too. She could tell by the way he went very still, watching her settle Brian against her chest. "Oh, Mel," he said quietly. "Did you just—" "I didn't mean to say that," she said quickly, feeling heat creep up her neck. "It just slipped out. I know I'm not his mother." But even as she said it, Brian was already calming in her arms, making those contented sounds that meant he felt safe. Her body responded automatically, that familiar tightening that meant she was ready to feed him, to comfort him, to be everything he needed. "So maybe we should cancel the appointment," Anthony said, checking his watch. "Reschedule for when we're both less stressed." "No," Melissa said firmly. "Brian needs his checkup. I can take him." "By yourself?" The question hung in the air between them. Taking Brian to the pediatrician alone felt like crossing a line they hadn't discussed. It felt like being his parent, not just his caregiver. "I've been to every appointment with him for the past month," she pointed out. "I know his feeding schedule, his sleep patterns, when he last had a diaper change. I probably know his routine better than you do right now." Anthony looked like he wanted to argue, but his phone buzzed with another call from his office. "The investors just landed at O'Hare," he said, checking the screen. "If I don't nail this presentation—" "Go," Melissa said. "Brian and I will handle the appointment. I'll text you updates." She could see the internal struggle on Anthony's face, the need to be present for his son versus the pressure to save his company. Finally, he grabbed his suit jacket from the back of the couch. "His insurance card is in the diaper bag," he said, moving into business mode. "The pediatrician is Dr. Sarah Chen at Northwestern Memorial. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately." "Anthony," Melissa said, shifting Brian to one arm so she could touch his shoulder. "I've got this. Trust me." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd become so integral to his life that he couldn't imagine navigating parenthood without her. "I do trust you," he said finally, "more than anyone." An hour later, sitting in Dr. Chen's office while Brian charmed the nurses with his serious expressions and occasional smiles, Melissa realized something had shifted. When the doctor asked about Brian's home life, she found herself answering naturally. "He's sleeping through the night now, eating well, very social. His dad is a wonderful father, very attentive." "And you're—" Dr. Chen asked, making notes on her tablet. Melissa hesitated for just a moment. "I'm his— I help take care of him." But in her heart, she knew she was more than that. She was the person Brian looked for when he woke up. She was the one who knew he preferred to be burped on the left shoulder, that he liked to have his feet tickled during diaper changes, that he calmed down fastest when she hummed old gospel songs. Walking out of the doctor's office with a perfectly healthy Brian in her arms, Melissa realized she had stopped thinking about when this arrangement would end and started thinking about what it would mean if it never did. That evening, Melissa discovered that some conversations change everything, and some truths are too big to take back once they're spoken. She was sitting on the floor of Anthony's living room, Brian propped up against her legs, when Anthony finally came home from his investor meeting. The Chicago skyline twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she'd been humming Amazing Grace, while Brian played with a soft toy from Target. "How did it go?" she asked, looking up as Anthony loosened his tie. His face was unreadable, but she'd learned to recognize the subtle signs of his moods over the past weeks. "We got the funding," he said, but his voice lacked the excitement she'd expected. $2.5 million for the next phase. "Anthony, that's incredible." Melissa lifted Brian up, making him giggle. "Did you hear that, little man? Your daddy is changing the world." But Anthony wasn't smiling. He sat down heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture she'd come to know so well. "How was the appointment?" he asked. "Perfect. Brian's growing beautifully, hitting all his milestones. Dr. Chen said he's in the 90th percentile for height." She settled Brian in his bouncy seat, where he could see both of them. "She also said he's clearly bonded with his primary caregiver." "You," Anthony said quietly. "Me," Melissa confirmed, feeling heat creep up her neck again. "Anthony, about what I said earlier, calling myself his mama," he finished. "You called yourself his mama." The word hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. Brian babbled happily, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening above his head. "I shouldn't have," Melissa said carefully. "I know Elena is his mother, even if she's not here. I never want to replace her or—" "Stop," Anthony said, his voice sharper than she'd heard it before. He stood up, pacing to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. "Just stop." Melissa felt her heart sink. She'd overstepped, gotten too comfortable, forgotten her place in this carefully constructed arrangement. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Anthony turned around, and she was surprised to see tears in his blue-gray eyes. "You're sorry? Mel, do you have any idea what you've given us?" "What you've given me?" She stared at him, confused by the emotion in his voice. "I spent 6 months failing at being Brian's father," he continued, his words coming faster now. 6 months of him crying every time I tried to hold him, of feeling like Elena's death was my fault and now I was failing her son too. I was using the Calm app 3 times a day just to function, and I still couldn't sleep because I was terrified something would happen to him on my watch." Brian made a soft sound, and Melissa automatically reached down to adjust his position, the gesture so natural it was unconscious. "And then you walked into my life," Anthony said, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Not just to help with Brian, but to show me what being a parent actually looks like. You don't just feed him and change him and put him to sleep. You know that he likes his left foot tickled more than his right. You know he calms down faster when you hum gospel songs. You know he's getting sleepy when he rubs his ear." "Those are just details," Melissa said softly. "Those details are love," Anthony replied, "and Brian knows it. I've watched him light up when he hears your voice in the hallway. I've seen him reach for you when he's scared or tired or just wants comfort. You are his mama, Mel, not because Eleanor isn't his mother, but because love doesn't have limits." Melissa felt tears threatening, the good kind that come when something you've been afraid to hope for suddenly seems possible. "But it's more than that," Anthony said, moving closer to where she sat on the floor. "For it's watching you become yourself again. You were broken when I met you, and I was broken too. But together, taking care of Brian, we've been healing each other." He knelt down beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "The investor meeting went well because I wasn't thinking about Elena for the first time in 8 months, he admitted. "I was thinking about you and Brian waiting for me at home. I was thinking about how I couldn't wait to tell you about the funding, to see you smile, to watch Brian try to grab my tie when I pick him up." "Anthony," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you," he said, the words simple and devastating. "I love how you make Brian laugh, how you argue with me about the right way to fold his clothes, how you hum while you're cooking dinner. I love that you're practical and sarcastic and beautiful and strong enough to survive losing everything and still have room in your heart for us." Brian chose that moment to make a demanding sound, reaching his little arms toward them both. Melissa picked him up automatically, and Anthony's hand covered hers where it rested on Brian's back. "I love you too," she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. "I love you both so much it terrifies me. I never thought I'd be able to feel this way again after Marcus, after my marriage fell apart. But you two, You've made me believe in family again." Anthony's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "So what do we do now?" Melissa looked down at Brian, who was looking between them with that serious baby expression, as if he understood the importance of the moment. "Now we stop pretending this is temporary," she said. "Now we stop being afraid of calling this what it is." "And what is it?" Anthony asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. "It's love," she said simply. "Messy and complicated and scary and real. It's a family that doesn't look like what either of us planned, but it's ours." Anthony leaned forward and kissed her, soft and gentle, while Brian babbled approvingly between them. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "There's something else," Anthony said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Melissa's breath caught. "I know it's crazy," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know we've only been together for 2 months, but I also know that I want to wake up next to you every morning, and I want Brian to call you Mama for real, and I want to build a life with you that's bigger than either of us imagined." But before Melissa could answer, Brian started crying, and this time, it wasn't the kind of crying that stopped when she held him. Brian's cries weren't stopping, and within minutes, Melissa realized this wasn't about hunger or sleepiness, but something that would test everything she and Anthony had just confessed to each other. "Something's wrong," Melissa said, her voice cutting through the romantic moment like cold steel. Brian's wails had an edge she'd never heard before, desperate and pained. She pressed her hand to his forehead, feeling the heat radiating from his small body. "Anthony, he's burning up!" The velvet ring box fell forgotten to the floor as Anthony jumped to his feet. "How high?" Melissa was already moving toward the nursery, her practical instincts overriding everything else. "Get the thermometer from his diaper bag. Now." The digital thermometer from CVS beeped ominously, 102.8 degrees. Brian's little face was flushed red, and his cries had taken on a quality that made Melissa's chest tight with fear she hadn't felt since Marcus's NICU days. "We need to get him to the hospital," she said, already grabbing the diaper bag with one hand while supporting Brian with the other. "Northwestern Memorial. Dr. Chen said to bring him straight to the ER if his fever went over 101. Anthony was pulling on his shoes, his face pale. "Should we call 911? Faster if we drive," Melissa said, wrapping Brian in a light blanket. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Months of medical appointments with Marcus had taught her to function in crisis mode. "Bring your insurance card and his medical records." The ride in Anthony's Tesla felt endless, even though Northwestern Memorial was only 12 minutes away. Melissa sat in the back with Brian, who had stopped crying and was now making weak, whimpering sounds that somehow felt worse than the screaming. "Talk to me, baby," she murmured, stroking his fevered cheek. "Stay with Mama, okay? We're going to make you feel better." Anthony caught her eye in the rearview mirror. Even in crisis, the word Mama felt right, felt true. The emergency department at Northwestern Memorial was controlled chaos. Bright lights, nurses in scrubs moving with practiced efficiency, the smell of antiseptic that brought back too many memories for Melissa. But when she approached the triage desk with Brian, everything happened fast. 6-month-old male, fever 102.8, lethargic, she told the nurse, her voice clinical and clear. No recent illness. Up to date on vaccines, breastfed. The nurse took one look at Brian and immediately led them to a pediatric examination room. Within minutes, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the pediatric emergency physician, was examining Brian with gentle but thorough hands. "How long has he had the fever?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, using a specialized thermometer in Brian's ear. "We first noticed it about 30 minutes ago," Melissa replied. 103.2 now. He was fine this afternoon at his regular checkup with Dr. Chen. Anthony stood beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "Is it serious?" "Fevers in babies this young are always concerning," Dr. Rodriguez said honestly. "We need to run some tests to rule out bacterial infection. Blood work, urine sample, possibly a lumbar puncture if his white count is elevated." Melissa felt her knees go weak. Lumbar puncture, spinal tap. The same word she'd heard in Marcus's NICU, words that meant they were looking for meningitis or other serious infections. "Hey," Anthony said quietly, his arm going around her waist. "He's going to be okay. He's strong, and he's got the best advocate in the world taking care of him." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and waiting. Brian screamed during the blood draw, his tiny veins difficult to find. Melissa held him through each test, humming gospel songs under her breath while tears streamed down her face. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," she whispered against his sweaty forehead. "That saved a wretch like me." Anthony paced the small room, checking his phone obsessively, calling Dr. Chen's after-hours line twice for reassurance. But every few minutes, he'd come back to where Melissa sat with Brian, his hand touching her shoulder or stroking Brian's hair. "Text from Janny," Melissa said, checking her cracked iPhone screen. "Girl, you missed our Tuesday FaceTime. Everything okay?" She typed back quickly. "Brian's sick, at Northwestern ER. We'll call later." Janny's response was immediate. "OMG, on my way." "You don't have to deal with visitors right now," Anthony said, reading over her shoulder. "She's family," Melissa replied simply. "And Brian needs all the people who love him praying right now." At 11:47 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez returned with Brian's test results. Melissa's hand found Anthony's automatically, both of them bracing for the worst. "Good news," the doctor said, and Melissa felt her entire body sag with relief. "Blood work is normal, urine is clear. This appears to be a viral infection, probably something he picked up from another baby or child. His immune system is doing exactly what it should, so he's going to be okay," Anthony asked, his voice thick with emotion. "He's going to be fine," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. "Fever should break in the next day or two. Tylenol for comfort, plenty of fluids, and follow up with Dr. Chen if it gets worse or lasts more than 3 days." Brian had fallen asleep in Melissa's arms during the doctor's explanation, his breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in hours. His fever had already started to come down, 101.2 on the last check. In the quiet of the hospital room, Anthony sank into the chair beside Melissa's. "I've never been that scared in my life," he admitted. "Not even when Elena was in surgery. This was different." "Because he's your son," Melissa said softly. "Because you love him. Because I couldn't imagine losing him," Anthony replied. "And I couldn't imagine going through it without you." Melissa looked down at Brian, sleeping so trustingly in her arms, his tiny fist wrapped around her finger. "When I was sitting here, holding him through those tests, all I could think was how this is what love looks like. Not the easy moments, not the Instagram-worthy pictures, but showing up when everything is scary and uncertain." Anthony pulled the forgotten ring box from his pocket, setting it gently on the hospital table beside them. "Melissa Renee Clark," he said quietly, "will you marry me? Will you be Brian's mama for real, legally and officially? Will you build a family with us that can handle whatever comes next?" Through her tears, Melissa looked at this man who'd found her in a coffee shop when they were both broken, who'd trusted her with his most precious gift, who'd stood beside her through crisis without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, "yes to all of it." Anthony slipped the simple, elegant ring onto her finger just as Janae burst through the hospital room door, still in her pajamas and looking frantic. "How's my baby?" Janny demanded, then stopped short when she saw the ring. "Oh my God, girl, did you just get engaged in the emergency room?" Melissa laughed through her tears, holding Brian close while Anthony's arm encircled them both. "Apparently, this family does everything the hard way." But looking around at the people who'd shown up for her, Anthony, Brian, Janny, even the kind hospital staff, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful families are built from the most unexpected moments. 6 months later, Melissa stood in the bathroom of their new apartment, staring at a pregnancy test that would change everything they thought they knew about their perfect life. The 2 pink lines stared back at her, impossible to deny. Her hands shook as she set the test on the counter beside the engagement ring that still felt new on her finger. Through the bathroom door, she could hear Anthony's voice mixing with Brian's happy babbling as they played in the living room of their Lincoln Park apartment, the place they'd chosen together, big enough for a family but cozy enough to feel like home. This can't be happening, she thought, her mind racing. Not now, when everything was finally falling into place. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of healing and building. She'd quit her job at Brewhaven and started taking online classes in early childhood development, funded by Anthony's insistence that her education was an investment in their family's future. Brian was thriving, walking now, saying mama and dada with equal enthusiasm, charming everyone at Millennium Park during their weekend picnics. Their wedding was planned for next month, a small ceremony at the same church in Bronzeville where Melissa had rediscovered her faith, followed by a reception with close friends and family. Even Eleanor's sister had reached out, wanting to meet the woman who'd brought light back into Brian's and Anthony's lives. But now this, another baby, another chance for everything to go wrong. "Mel?" Anthony's voice carried from the living room. "Brian's asking for you. I think he wants his afternoon snack." She splashed cold water on her face, trying to compose herself. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who'd changed dramatically over the past year, healthier, happier, with a confidence that came from being truly loved. But right now she looked terrified. Walking into the living room, she found Anthony on the floor with Brian, who was now almost a year old and getting into everything. Brian had inherited his father's curious nature and his mother's determination, a combination that kept them constantly entertained and occasionally exhausted. "Mama!" Brian called out, crawling toward her with the speed that still amazed her. She scooped him up automatically, breathing in his familiar baby scent that always calmed her nerves. "How are my boys?" she asked, settling onto the couch with Brian in her lap. "Perfect," Anthony said, joining them. "Brian figured out how to open the cabinet where we keep his toys. Kid's going to be an engineer like his old man." Anthony looked different too, more relaxed, quick to laugh, the permanent worry lines around his eyes replaced by laugh lines. His sustainable energy company had expanded beyond his wildest dreams, but he'd learned to leave work at work, to prioritize dinner time and bedtime stories over late-night emails. "Anthony," Melissa said carefully, "we need to talk about something." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "What's wrong? You look pale." Brian babbled happily, playing with Melissa's braids, oblivious to the tension suddenly filling their living room. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, the words hanging in the air like a confession. Anthony went very still. "Pregnant. I took 3 tests. They're all positive." Melissa felt tears threatening. "I know we didn't plan this. I know we're still figuring out being married, being Brian's parents. I know it's too soon and too complicated and—" Anthony's hands cupped her face, stopping her panicked words. "Mel, breathe. I'm scared," she whispered. "After what happened with Marcus, after everything we've been through to get here, what if something goes wrong? What if I can't carry this baby to term? What if we're not ready?" Brian, sensing his mama's distress, reached up to pat her cheek with his tiny hand, making soft, comforting sounds. "Look at me," Anthony said gently. "Do you remember what you told me the night Brian got sick? About love not being the easy moments, but showing up when everything is scary and uncertain?" Melissa nodded, unable to speak. "I love you," he said simply. "I love Brian, and I'm going to love this baby. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what families do. But what if everything goes perfectly?" Anthony interrupted. "What if this baby is healthy and strong and gives Brian a sibling to boss around? What if we're better parents this time because we've already learned how to love a child together?" Brian chose that moment to clap his hands, as if applauding his father's speech. The sound made them both laugh despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "Besides," Anthony said, his voice lighter now, "we've gotten pretty good at handling the unexpected." Melissa felt something loosen in her chest, not the complete absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. Hope, mixed with trust in the man who'd shown her that love could survive anything. "So you're okay with this?" she asked. "I'm terrified," Anthony admitted. "But I'm also excited. Brian's going to be an amazing big brother." As if he understood, Brian looked between his parents and clapped again, making them both smile. 3 weeks later, at their first prenatal appointment with Dr. Sarah Martinez at Northwestern Memorial, they heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time, strong and steady, filling the examination room with the promise of new life. "Everything looks perfect, Doctor," Martinez said, pointing to the ultrasound screen. "Due date is March 15th. Would you like pictures?" Anthony squeezed Melissa's hand as they watched their tiny baby on the monitor, no bigger than a grape, but already loved beyond measure. That evening, they sat on their couch with Brian between them, looking at the ultrasound photos. Brian studied the pictures seriously, as if he understood their importance. "What do you think, buddy?" Anthony asked. "Ty ready to be a big brother?" Brian babbled something that sounded remarkably like baby, making them both laugh. Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from Janai. "Girl, you're glowing in these engagement photos. When are you giving Brian a sibling?" She showed the message to Anthony, who grinned. "Should we tell her?" "Let's wait until after the wedding," Melissa said. "I want one perfect day that's just about us, before we announce we're expanding again." Anthony pulled both of them closer, Brian settling contentedly against his chest, while Melissa curled into his side. Through their living room windows, Chicago sparkled in the distance, the city where they'd found each other, where they'd built a family from broken pieces and impossible circumstances. "I love our life," Melissa said softly. "Even though it's nothing like what either of us planned." "Especially because of that," she replied. "Marcus taught me that love doesn't guarantee a happy ending, but you and Brian taught me that happy endings can come from the most unexpected places." Brian made a sleepy sound, his eyelids getting heavy. Soon he'd be ready for bed, for the nighttime routine they'd perfected over months of practice. Bath time with extra bubbles, stories read in silly voices, lullabies hummed in the dark. "We're going to be okay," Melissa said, not as a question, but as a promise to herself, to Anthony, to their growing family. And for the first time since she'd seen those two pink lines, she truly believed it. 3 years later, Melissa Gabriel stood in the kitchen of their Evanston home, watching through the window as Anthony pushed 2-year-old Sophia on the swing set while 4-year-old Brian demonstrated his superhero jumps from the slide. The late afternoon sunlight caught the highlights in her braids, now styled in a sophisticated updo that reflected her new role as Director of Family Services at a non-profit in downtown Chicago. Her silver bracelet, her mother's bracelet, still caught the light as she moved, but now it was joined by a simple wedding band and the engagement ring that had survived emergency rooms and midnight feedings and everything life had thrown at their unconventional family. "Mama, watch this!" Brian called out, performing an elaborate somersault that made Sophia clap her hands with delight. His blue-grey eyes, so much like his father's, but with Elena's warmth, sparkled with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted he was loved completely. Sophia, with her mother's dark curls and her father's serious expression, pointed toward the house. "Mama!" she called in her clear toddler voice, the word that still made Melissa's heart skip a beat every time she heard it. The pregnancy with Sophia had been different from her loss with Marcus, filled with cautious joy instead of devastating grief, supported by a partner who held her through every moment of fear. When Sophia was born, healthy and strong at Northwestern Memorial, crying loudly enough to fill the delivery room with life, Melissa had finally understood that some stories get second chances. "Dinner in 10 minutes, she called through the open window, earning a wave from Anthony and excited cheers from the children. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janae. "Still on for Sunday brunch. The kids are excited to see their honorary cousins." Melissa smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it." Sophia's been practicing saying Auntie Janae all week. The kitchen smelled of the pot roast she'd learned to make from a recipe Anthony's mother had shared. Elena's favorite meal, she'd been told. It had taken time, but Elena's family had slowly opened their hearts to Melissa, recognizing that loving Brian didn't mean replacing his birth mother, but honoring her memory by giving him the fullest life possible. A framed photo on the kitchen counter showed Elena holding her pregnant belly, smiling with anticipation she'd never get to fulfill. But next to it sat a recent family photo. Anthony, Melissa, Brian, and Sophia at Millennium Park, all of them laughing at something Brian had said, not a replacement for what was lost, but proof that love could grow in the spaces between grief. The front door opened with the chaos that had become their normal. Brian racing in to wash his hands, Sophia toddling after him with grass stains on her Carter's dress, Anthony following with the inevitable collection of outdoor toys that never seemed to make it back to their proper places. "How was your day?" Anthony asked, kissing her cheek as he passed. His hair was slightly grey at the temples now, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at her the way they had that first day in the coffee shop. "Good. The Johnson family finally got approved for adoption. I cried happy tears in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Melissa handed him plates to set on the dining room table. "How was yours?" "The Portland contract came through. We're officially expanding to the West Coast." Anthony grinned. "But more importantly, Brian informed me that he's going to marry his teacher when he grows up." And Sophia learned to say "please" when she wants something. "Peas," Sophia demonstrated from her high chair, clapping her hands. "That's my smart girl," Melissa said, kissing the top of Sophia's curls. As they sat around their dinner table, the one they'd picked out together at IKEA during their first year of marriage, practical but warm, Melissa looked at her family and felt the deep contentment that comes from building something real from broken pieces. Brian was telling an elaborate story about his preschool art project, complete with dramatic gestures that made Sophia giggle. Anthony listened with the patient attention of a father who'd learned to treasure every ordinary moment. and Sophia babbled along, contributing her own commentary in the language only toddlers speak fluently. "What are we grateful for today?" Anthony asked, the dinner tradition they'd started when Brian turned 3. "I'm grateful for my new sneakers with the lights," Brian announced seriously. "And for Mama making the good mac and cheese, not the box kind. I'm grateful for successful client meetings and for coming home to this chaos," Anthony said, reaching over to squeeze Melissa's hand. "Peas," Sophia contributed, which made everyone laugh. "I'm grateful," Melissa said, looking around the table at faces she couldn't have imagined loving this much just a few years ago, for second chances. For families that don't look like what you planned but feel exactly like home, for little boys who teach you to be brave, and little girls who remind you to find joy in everything. After dinner, after baths and stories, and the elaborate bedtime routine that involved 2 different nightlights, 3 stuffed animals, and Brian reading a picture book to Sophia in his most dramatic voice, Melissa and Anthony finally collapsed on their couch. "Tired?" Anthony asked, pulling her close. "The good kind of tired," she replied, settling against his chest, "the kind that comes from a life well lived." Through their living room windows, Evanston stretched peacefully around them, a suburb they'd chosen for its good schools and tree-lined streets, but mostly for the way it felt like possibility. Not the desperate possibility of people running from something, but the settled possibility of people who'd found where they belonged. Melissa's phone buzzed with a notification from her Dailyo app, a habit she'd kept even after the depression lifted, a way of tracking not just moods but moments of gratitude. Tonight she selected the bright green, radiant emoji and added a note, "Perfect ordinary Tuesday with my extraordinary family. Remember when you thought this was temporary?" Anthony asked softly, his fingers playing with her braids. "I remember being terrified that loving you both would break me," she admitted. I never imagined it would make me whole instead." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their house settling around them, the hum of the dishwasher, the soft whisper of the baby monitor, the distant sounds of a neighborhood full of families like theirs, all learning to love each other through the beautiful, messy work of being human. Later that night, as Melissa checked on both children before going to bed, she whispered the same prayer she'd said every night since Sophia was born. "Thank you for trusting me with them. Help me be worthy of this love." Standing in the doorway, watching Brian sleep with his arm protectively around his little sister in her toddler bed that he'd insisted be moved into his room, Melissa realized that some families aren't born. They're built one day at a time, one act of love at a time, one choice to stay at a time. And this family, born from loss and watered with hope, had grown into something more beautiful than any of them had dared to dream. What would you have done in Melissa's place? When life breaks your heart completely, do you have the courage to risk loving again? And if you were Anthony, could you have opened your heart to someone new while still honoring the memory of your first love? Love after loss isn't about replacing what you've lost. It's about discovering that the heart has infinite capacity to love again, differently, but just as deeply. Millionaire CEO hired a fake bride to impress his father, but now he's really fallen in love. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The autumn rain drummed against the diner's windows, turning the neon signs outside into watercolor smears. Kendra Lowell's feet ached as she poured coffee into a customer's cup for the 7th time that hour. The ceramic pot felt heavier with each pass, like it was filling with her exhaustion instead of dark roast. "You're an angel, honey," the elderly regular mumbled, clutching his cup like a lifeline. Kendra managed a genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes despite everything. It was a gift she'd inherited from her mother, the ability to find warmth even when the world felt cold. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Another text from the hospital about her mother's upcoming treatments. Another reminder of the mountain of bills waiting at home. Kendra touched the device through the fabric, like a worry stone before continuing her rounds. The bell above the door chimed, and he walked in. Kendra noticed him immediately, not because of his expensive coat or the way he carried himself like he owned the building's deed, but because of how out of place he looked in Lou's diner at 9:47 p.m. Everything about him screamed corporate Atlanta, from his precisely trimmed hair to his polished Oxfords that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He chose a booth by the window, away from the other customers. As Kendra approached, she caught his reflection in the rain-streaked glass, Sharp features, calculated posture, and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they landed on. "Welcome to Lou's. Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for a clean mug. "No." His voice was low, controlled. "I'm here for you, Miss Lowell." The coffee pot nearly slipped from her grip. "Excuse me? My name is Jonas Rhodes." He placed a business card on the table. "I have a proposition that could solve your financial situation. All of it." Kendra's throat tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't take propositions from strangers." She turned to leave, but his next words froze her in place. "Your mother's medical bills, the 3 months of back rent, the payday loan you took out last week." He wasn't reading from anything, just stating facts like he was discussing the weather. "I can make it all go away." The diner's fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright, too exposing. Kendra slid into the booth across from him, her hands gripping the coffee pot like a shield. "How do you know about any of that?" "I'm thorough." Jonas leaned forward slightly, his silver blue eyes catching the neon glow from outside. "I need a fiancé. 3 months, public appearances, family functions, a contract, nothing more. In return, you get financial freedom." A laugh bubbled up from Kendra's chest, sharp, defensive. "You're crazy." She stood up, the vinyl seat squeaking beneath her. "I'm not that desperate." "Aren't you?" His tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "Your mother needs specialized treatment. The waiting list is long, but money has a way of shortening it." The coffee pot shook in Kendra's hands. She thought of her mother's voice on the phone that morning, trying to hide the pain. Thought of the unpaid bills spread across her kitchen table like fallen leaves. "Why me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Because you're real." Jonas's eyes flickered to her name tag, then back to her face. "You work hard. You're respected here. You have no social media presence to complicate things, no external relationships that could interfere. And," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "you look at people like you see them, really see them. My father would believe it." Kendra set the coffee pot down with more force than necessary. "Your father? He's dying." Jonas delivered this information with the same detachment as everything else, but something in his jaw tightened. "His last wish is to see me settled down, happy." His mouth twisted slightly on the last word. "So you want to lie to your dying father?" Kendra's voice carried an edge of judgment she didn't try to hide. "I want to give him peace." Jonas reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "Inside is a contract and a cashier's check for the first payment. Take it home, read it. Think about what you could do with that money." The envelope felt heavy in Kendra's hands, heavier than any coffee pot, heavier than all her worries combined. She slipped it into her apron pocket without looking inside. "I have your number," Jonas said, standing. He was tall, his presence filling the narrow space between booth and table. "You have 24 hours to decide." He left a $50 tip on the table and walked out into the rain. Kendra watched his silhouette disappear behind the watery glass, her heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to break free. The envelope burned in her pocket all through her shift. When she finally got home to her small apartment, she sat at her cluttered kitchen table and opened it with trembling fingers. The number on the check made her gasp. Her phone lit up with another text from the hospital. Her mother's name glowed on the screen like an accusation. Kendra closed her eyes, remembering her mother's words from long ago. "Baby, sometimes dignity is all we got." But what good was dignity if it couldn't keep her mother alive? She picked up her phone and typed a message before she could change her mind. "I'll do it, but I have conditions." The response came almost immediately. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The address is in the contract." Kendra pushed aside the pile of overdue notices to make room for the contract on her table. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away everything except the choice she'd just made, and all the lies that would come with it. The Buckhead office building reflected morning sunlight like a wall of mirrors, making Kendra squint as she approached. She'd spent an hour choosing her outfit, settling on a forest green wrap dress that her friend had once called her power suit. Now standing before the gleaming entrance in her only pair of decent heels, she felt like an actress who'd wandered onto the wrong set. The security guard gave her a once-over before checking his list. "Ms. Lowell, 19th floor." The elevator ride felt eternal. Kendra watched her reflection in the polished doors, adjusting her carefully styled curls, straightening her spine, practicing what her mother called the Queen's posture. The numbers climbed, 12, 13, 14. Each ding of the elevator made her heart beat faster. Jonas's office matched him perfectly. Minimalist, expensive, cold, Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Atlanta that made the city look like a different world entirely. He stood when she entered, gesturing to a leather chair across from his desk. "You're early," he noted, checking his watch. "Good." Kendra placed her worn leather bag carefully beside the chair, trying not to think about how it looked against the pristine floor. "I have questions." "I assumed you would." Jonas sat back down, his movements precise and controlled. A manila folder lay centered on his desk, lined up exactly parallel with the edge. "The contract covers most scenarios, but please, ask away." "How do we explain how we met?" Kendra leaned forward slightly. "Your father's not going to believe you fell in love with a waitress you never knew existed until yesterday." Something flickered in Jonas's eyes. Surprise, maybe appreciation. "You're right." He opened the folder, revealing several typed pages. "I've prepared a background story. We met 4 months ago when you catered an event at my office. We kept running into each other at the same coffee shop. Things progressed naturally." "Nothing about that story is natural," Kendra said flatly. "Rich executives don't frequent diners in my neighborhood, and I don't do catering." Jonas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What do you suggest?" "The truth, partly." Kendra met his gaze steadily. "You came to the diner multiple times. Maybe you were dealing with your father's illness, needed somewhere quiet to think, away from all—" She gestured at the office around them. "This. We talked, connected. That's—" Jonas paused, considering. "Actually better, more believable. Because it's closer to real life." Kendra smoothed her dress over her knees. "People fall in love in diners every day. They don't fall in love over corporate catering." The word love hung in the air between them, awkward and heavy. Jonas cleared his throat, shuffling papers unnecessarily. "The contract stipulates public appearances, family dinners, social media presence." "No social media," Kendra cut in. "I don't have any accounts, and suddenly creating them would look suspicious. Besides, your father's not going to be checking Instagram, is he?" Another flicker of surprise crossed Jonas's face. "No, he's not." He made a note on one of the pages. "What about living arrangements?" "I keep my apartment." Kendra's voice was firm. "I'll stay at your place when necessary. Family visits, maintaining appearances. But I need my own space." Jonas nodded slowly. "Acceptable, though you'll need a more suitable wardrobe for certain events. I'll provide a credit card." "I'll choose my own clothes," Kendra interrupted again. "You can give input on formal events, but I'm not turning into some buckhead Barbie. Your father needs to believe this is real. Then let me be real." For the first time that morning, Jonas really looked at her, not through her or at her, but at who she was. His expression shifted slightly, something almost like respect crossing his features. "One more thing," Kendra added, her voice softer now. "When this is over, when the 3 months are up, I don't want some messy public breakup. We tell people it didn't work out. We stay civil. I go back to my life. You go back to yours." "Agreed." Jonas pulled out a pen, expensive like everything else about him, and began making modifications to the contract. The scratch of metal on paper was the only sound in the room for several long moments. Finally, he slid the papers across the desk. "I've added your conditions. The payment schedule remains the same, half now, half upon completion." Kendra took the pen he offered, its weight unfamiliar in her hand. She read each page carefully, her mother's voice in her head reminding her to always know what she was signing. When she reached the final page, she hesitated. "Your father," she said quietly. "What's his name?" Jonas blinked, caught off guard by the question. Harrison Rhodes." Kendra nodded, then signed her name in flowing script. "I hope this brings him peace, Jonas." "That's the goal." He took the contract back, his fingers barely brushing hers in the exchange. The touch was brief, professional, meaningless, but somehow it made everything feel suddenly, startlingly real. "The ring," Jonas said, reaching into his desk drawer. The velvet box he produced was vintage, dark blue with slightly worn edges. "It belonged to my mother." Kendra's heart stuttered. "I can't—" "It's necessary," Jonas cut in, his voice leaving no room for argument. "My father would expect it. He helped pick it out 35 years ago." With careful movements, Jonas opened the box. The ring inside caught the morning light, a classic oval diamond surrounded by smaller stones, set in white gold that had developed a soft patina with age. It was beautiful in an understated way, nothing like the gaudy rocks Kendra saw on the fingers of women who sometimes came into the diner. "May I?" Jonas asked, holding out his hand. Kendra nodded, unable to speak. He took her left hand in his his skin cool and dry against her palm, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "How did you know my size?" she whispered. "I told you," Jonas replied, releasing her hand. "I'm thorough." Kendra stared at the ring, at the way it caught and held the light. This small circle of metal and stone now represented everything: the lies, the promise, the weight of what they were about to do. She thought of Harrison Rhodes lying in a hospital bed somewhere, holding on to hope that his son had found happiness. "When do we tell him?" she asked. Jonas straightened his tie, a nervous gesture he probably wasn't aware of. "Tonight. I've arranged dinner at his house. His nurse says he's having a good day." "Tonight?" Kendra's stomach dropped. That's so soon. Time isn't something we have in abundance." Jonas's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before, something raw and honest that slipped through his carefully maintained facade. Kendra touched the ring gently, turning it on her finger. "Then we better make it count." She stood, gathering her bag, feeling the weight of Jonas's mother's ring on her hand, like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "What time should I be ready?" "I'll pick you up at 6. Jonas was already turning back to his computer, rebuilding the wall between them. "Wear something nice." Kendra smiled slightly, despite everything. "Don't worry, Jonas. I clean up pretty well." As she walked back to the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble floor, Kendra caught her reflection in the windows. She looked exactly the same as she had walking in, but something had shifted, like a photo that had been reframed, showing familiar features in a completely different light. The ring glinted on her finger, both a question and an answer. 3 months, she reminded herself, just 3 months of pretending to be in love with a man who saw marriage as a business transaction. What could possibly go wrong? The Rhodes family estate loomed against the darkening sky like something out of a Gothic novel. Kendra sat in Jonas's Mercedes, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to fidget with the ring that still felt foreign on her finger. Her burgundy dress, borrowed from her friend Destiny, hugged her curves while maintaining elegance. She'd spent an hour on her makeup, going for natural but polished, and styled her curls into a crown of intricate twists. Jonas hadn't said a word about her appearance when he picked her up, but she'd caught him looking just for a moment before his face settled back into its usual mask of detachment. "Remember," Jonas said now, killing the engine. "My father is traditional, but not—" "You gave me the brief," Kendra cut in. "Twice. I know who Harrison Rhodes is, former CEO of Rhodes Development, widowed 17 years ago, conservative but fair-minded, loves classical music and rare books, hates tardiness and artificial sweeteners." She took a breath. "What you haven't told me is who he is to you." Jonas's hands tightened on the steering wheel, though the car wasn't running. "He's my father." "That's not what I meant." Before Jonas could respond, the front door opened, spilling warm light onto the circular driveway. A nurse in crisp scrubs appeared, waving them in. "Showtime," Jonas murmured, exiting the car and coming around to open her door. As Kendra stepped out, Jonas offered his arm, the first time they'd really touched since the ring. She took it, feeling the expensive wool of his suit jacket under her fingers. He smelled like sandalwood and something else she couldn't place, clean and expensive like everything else about him. "Nervous?" he asked quietly as they approached the door. "Terrified," Kendra admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "But I've waited tables for 5 years. I know how to smile through anything." Something that might have been admiration flickered across Jonas's face. Then they were inside, and everything changed. The house was old money personified, all dark wood and oil paintings, with a grand staircase that curved up to the second floor. But what struck Kendra most was the silence. It felt like a museum after hours, preserved, but not quite lived in. "Jonas." The voice came from the living room, weak but carrying authority even now. Harrison Rhodes sat in a leather armchair near a fireplace, a blanket across his legs, despite the Atlanta heat. He was thin, almost gaunt, but his eyes were sharp as they took in his son, then Kendra. "You must be the woman who's captured my boy's heart," Harrison said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. Kendra crossed the room and took his hand in both of hers, warm and gentle. "I'm Kendra Lowell, Mr. Rhodes. Thank you for having me in your home. Harrison, please." He gestured to the sofa nearby. "Sit. Tell me how you met my impossibly serious son." Jonas remained standing, his posture stiff. "Father, you should rest. We can talk over dinner." "Jonas." Harrison's voice carried a warning. "Let the lady speak." Kendra sat on the edge of the sofa, smoothing her dress. This was the moment. their carefully constructed story about to be tested. But looking at Harrison's eager face, she suddenly couldn't bear to recite a script. "It was raining," she began, surprising both men. "The kind of rain that turns Atlanta into a watercolor painting. Jonas came into the diner where I work, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world." She glanced at Jonas, who had frozen in place. He ordered black coffee and didn't touch it for an hour, just stared out the window like he was trying to solve a puzzle no one else could see. Harrison leaned forward slightly. "When was this?" 4 months ago, Kendra said softly. "He came back the next night, and the next. Always during my shift, always that same lost look. Until one night I sat down across from him and said, 'Either drink the coffee or tell me what's wrong. You're driving me crazy.'" Jonas made a small sound. Surprise or protest, she couldn't tell. But Harrison was smiling now, really smiling. "And what did he say?" the older man asked. Kendra looked directly at Jonas as she answered. "He said, 'Everything's wrong, but the coffee helps.'" Something shifted in Jonas's expression, subtle but unmistakable. He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "After that," Kendra continued, her voice warm with manufactured memory, "we just talked about books, music, life. He told me about his mother's garden, how it used to smell like roses and mint." Harrison's eyes glistened. Claire loved her gardens. "I know," Kendra said gently. "Jonas says the roses never bloomed quite the same after she was gone." Jonas's hand found hers then, not for show but like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline, his fingers interlaced with hers, warm and desperate. "Dinner is served," the nurse announced from the doorway, breaking the spell. Harrison insisted on walking to the dining room himself, though the nurse hovered nearby. Jonas kept hold of Kendra's hand as they followed, his grip almost painful. The dining room was formal, with a table that could seat 20, but was set for only 3. Crystal glasses caught the light from a chandelier, making rainbow patterns on the white tablecloth. "Wine?" Jonas asked, finally releasing her hand to pour from a decanter. "Please," Kendra said, though she rarely drank. She had a feeling she'd need it. Over perfectly cooked salmon and roasted vegetables, Harrison asked about Kendra's family. She told him about her mother, the real version, not their practiced story. About growing up in Atlanta, about her mother's work as a school librarian, about the books they used to read together when money was tight and entertainment was precious. A librarian, Harrison mused. Claire would have loved that. She always said you could tell everything about a person by what they read. "And what does Jonas read?" Kendra asked, genuinely curious. "Business journals," Harrison said with a slight frown. "Investment reports. Ever since Claire..." He trailed off, his hand shaking as he reached for his water glass. Jonas stood abruptly. "Father, you're tired. We should..." "Sit down, Jonas." Harrison's voice was firm despite his weakness. "I'm fine, and I want to know more about the woman who made my son read poetry again." Kendra's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Poetry?" Jonas stared at his plate, his jaw tight. Harrison smiled, a knowing, gentle smile that made him look younger. "I found Frost's collected works on his desk last week, open to The Road Not Taken. It's been years since..." The nurse appeared again, touching Harrison's shoulder gently. "Time for your evening medication, Mr. Rhodes." Harrison sighed but nodded. The curse of mortality. He looked at Kendra, his eyes suddenly serious. "You'll come again?" "Of course," Kendra said, meaning it despite herself. "I'd love to hear more about Claire's gardens." "Next time," Harrison promised. He turned to Jonas, who had stood to help him up. "Son, don't let this one go." Jonas's face was unreadable. "Good night, Father." They watched Harrison leave with the nurse, his steps slow but determined. When he was gone, Jonas collapsed back into his chair, reaching for the wine decanter with unsteady hands. "The roses," he said, his voice rough. "How did you know about the roses?" Kendra touched the ring on her finger, his mother's ring. "You said she died 17 years ago. The ring is at least 35 years old. There's a tiny engraving inside, 'Forever like roses.' I took a chance." Jonas poured himself another glass of wine, larger than strictly proper. "You're dangerous, Kendra Lowell." "No," she said quietly. "I just pay attention." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their deception heavy in the air between them. Finally, Jonas spoke. "You didn't stick to the story. I made it better." Kendra stood, smoothing her dress. "Your father doesn't need a fairy tale. He needs to believe his son found something real." Jonas looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw real emotion in those silver blue eyes. And what if he gets attached? What if, in 3 months, Kendra said gently, you'll tell him it didn't work out, that sometimes love isn't enough. He'll be sad, but he'll have his memories of seeing you happy. Sometimes that's all we can give the people we love. Jonas stood too, closer to her than strictly necessary. You're not what I expected. I know, Kendra smiled slightly. I'm real, remember? Outside, the night had turned cool. Jonas drove her home in silence, but it wasn't the same tense silence as before. When they reached her apartment building, he spoke. Next Wednesday, there's a charity dinner. Kendra nodded, already reaching for the door handle. Text me the details. Kendra, his voice stopped her. The poetry. Frost. It wasn't. I didn't. Good night, Jonas, she said softly, stepping out into the night. She waited until his car disappeared around the corner before touching her mother's ring, a habit she'd already developed. 3 months suddenly felt like both an eternity and not nearly long enough. Upstairs in her small but tidy apartment, Kendra kicked off her heels and went straight to her laptop. She had research to do. Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken glowed on her screen until long past midnight. The St. Regis ballroom sparkled like a champagne bubble, all crystal and candlelight, money and manufactured elegance. Kendra stood in the powder room, adjusting the midnight blue gown she'd found at a consignment shop in Buckhead. The dress had probably cost someone else thousands, but she'd gotten it for a fraction of that. It fit like it was made for her, flowing from a sweetheart neckline to a subtle mermaid hem that made her feel like liquid starlight. She'd done her makeup carefully, defining her eyes with smoky shadow and her lips with deep berry stain. Her curls were swept up in an intricate style that had taken an hour to perfect, with a few tendrils left loose to soften her face. Claire's ring caught the light as she touched up her lipstick one last time. You can do this, she whispered to her reflection. It's just another performance. But it wasn't, really. The past week had been a blur of texts from Jonas, instructions about who would be at the dinner, which forks to use, how to address the governor's wife. He'd been thorough, professional, distant, nothing like the man who had held her hand so desperately in his father's living room. Taking a deep breath, Kendra stepped back into the ballroom. Jonas was exactly where she'd left him, in a perfect black tuxedo, maintaining polite conversation with an elderly couple. His eyes found her immediately, and something flickered across his face, something that made her pulse quicken despite herself. Ah, there she is, Jonas said as she approached, his arm sliding around her waist with practiced ease. Darling, you remember Judge and Mrs. Whitmore? Of course, Kendra smiled, though she'd never met them before tonight. Were you just discussing the new children's wing at the hospital? Mrs. Whitmore beamed. Jonas was telling us it was your idea to focus the fundraising there first. Kendra shot Jonas a quick look. This wasn't part of their briefing, but he squeezed her waist gently, a signal to play along. Children deserve every chance, Kendra said softly, thinking of the kids she saw at the diner, counting quarters for a slice of pie. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in them. The conversation flowed naturally after that. Kendra found herself genuinely enjoying the Whitmore's company, especially when Mrs. Whitmore confessed she'd been a waitress herself before law school. Beauty and substance, Judge Whitmore commented to Jonas as a new song began. Better hold on to this one. Jonas's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Kendra's waist. Would you care to dance? On the dance floor, Jonas pulled her close, closer than strictly necessary for a waltz. His hand was warm against her back, and she could smell that sandalwood cologne that was becoming dangerously familiar. You're good at this, he murmured, as they moved across the floor. The dancing or the lying? Both. His eyes met hers. Though I'm beginning to wonder which is which. Kendra's heart stuttered. Jonas. The children's wing, he cut in, his voice low. The hospital board's been fighting about it for months. But when you talked about your mother's treatment, about the families you see struggling, it made sense, so I proposed it. You used me as inspiration for a multi-million-dollar project. I used the truth. His thumb traced small circles on her back, probably unconsciously. That's what you told me to do, remember? The music swelled, and Jonas spun her gracefully. When she came back to him, his eyes had that same intensity she'd seen at his father's house. Harrison called this morning, he said quietly. He wanted to know if you'd come to Sunday dinner again. He's having a good week. Of course I will. The answer came automatically, and Kendra realized she meant it. How is he? Better. He's been reading Frost. Jonas's mouth quirked slightly. Asked if I'd borrowed his copy or bought my own. And? I bought my own. His admission was soft, almost embarrassed. It's on my nightstand. Something warm unfurled in Kendra's chest. Before she could respond, a tap on Jonas's shoulder interrupted them. Mind if I cut in? The man was around Jonas's age, handsome in an obvious way, with perfectly styled hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm Garrett Preston. Jonas and I went to prep school together. Jonas's face went carefully blank. Garrett, I didn't know you were in town. Just flew in. Couldn't miss the chance to meet the woman who finally tamed Jonas Rhodes. Garrett's eyes raked over Kendra in a way that made her skin crawl. May I? Social protocol left no room for refusal. Jonas stepped back, his jaw tight, and Garrett swept Kendra into a dance that was technically perfect and completely cold. So, Garrett said, his breath smelling of expensive scotch, how much is he paying you? Kendra missed a step. Excuse me? Come on. Garrett's smile was cruel now. Jonas doesn't do relationships, hasn't since Claire died, but suddenly he's engaged to a waitress. Please. Heat rushed to Kendra's face, anger, not embarrassment. You don't know him very well, do you? Known him since we were 10. Never seen him cry. Not even at his mother's funeral. Garrett leaned closer. Whatever he's giving you, I can double it. Kendra stopped dancing abruptly, causing nearby couples to swerve around them. Mr. Preston, she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention. You have exactly 3 seconds to remove your hand from my waist before I make a scene these lovely people will never forget. Everything all right? Jonas materialized beside them, his voice arctic. Your fiancé was just threatening me, Garrett said, attempting a laugh that died in his throat when he saw Jonas's expression. Good. Jonas took Kendra's hand, lacing their fingers together. She's better at restraint than I am. Leave. Now. Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked away. The nearby dancers pretended not to stare. I'm sorry, Jonas said quietly, leading Kendra toward the terrace doors. Garrett's always been a snake, Kendra supplied as they stepped into the cool night air. A creep? An example of everything wrong with inherited wealth? A startled laugh escaped Jonas, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. It transformed his face, softening the sharp edges, making him look younger, all of the above. He shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm from his body, and that sandalwood scent enveloped her. What he said about my mother's funeral isn't any of my business. Kendra turned to face him, close enough to see the faint stubble on his jaw. We all grieve differently. Jonas studied her face in the moonlight. How do you do that? Do what? See the best in everything, in everyone. His hand came up, almost touching her cheek before dropping away. Even in me. Kendra's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Maybe I'm just a good actress. No. Jonas shook his head slowly. You're real, remember? That's why I chose you. The word chose hit Kendra like a splash of cold water. This was business. A contract. Nothing more. We should go back inside, she said, stepping away from him. People will talk. Let them. But Jonas offered his arm anyway, ever the perfect gentleman. As they walked back into the ballroom, Kendra caught their reflection in the giant mirrors that lined the walls. They looked perfect together, like something out of a magazine spread. But perfection, she was learning, was just another kind of lie. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and champagne. Kendra played her part flawlessly, charming donors and deflecting subtle inquiries about wedding plans. Jonas kept her close, his hand always finding the small of her back, her waist, her arm, touches that felt less and less like performance with each passing hour. It was nearly midnight when they finally left. In the car, Jonas was quiet, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Thank you, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. For tonight, for everything. Kendra watched the city lights blur past her window. I'm just doing my job. Right. Jonas's voice was strange. The contract. They pulled up to her building, but before Kendra could reach for the door, Jonas spoke again. Sunday dinner? 6 o'clock? I'll be ready. She slipped off his jacket, immediately missing its warmth. Good night, Jonas. Good night, Kendra. She waited until she was inside her apartment to let out the breath she'd been holding. Carefully, she hung up the beautiful dress, removed the borrowed jewelry, washed away the perfect makeup, but when she finally crawled into bed, she could still feel the ghost of Jonas's hand on her back, still smell sandalwood on her skin. It's not real, she whispered into the darkness. None of it is real. But as she drifted off to sleep, Robert Frost's words echoed in her mind. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. She dreamed of roses that bloomed in winter, and a man who bought poetry books but couldn't cry at funerals. Kendra's alarm went off at 5 a.m., as it did every morning before her early shift. But today, her body felt heavier, still carrying the weight of last night's champagne and unspoken words. She forced herself through her routine: shower, coffee, uniform laid out on her small bed. The ring caught her eye as she was pinning her name tag to her pale blue uniform dress. In the harsh fluorescent light of her bathroom, it looked different, less like a prop and more like a promise she wasn't sure she had the right to keep. Her phone buzzed. "Jonas, Garrett's been talking. We need to discuss damage control. Breakfast?" Kendra stared at the message, her stomach tightening. Another buzz. "Please." That single word, so unlike his usual precise, formal texts, made her decision for her. Lou's Diner, 6 a.m., before my shift. She could almost see him grimacing at the early hour, but his response was immediate. "I'll be there." The pre-dawn air was thick with humidity as Kendra walked the 6 blocks to work. Lou was already there, his massive frame moving with surprising grace as he prepped the kitchen. "Early bird," he called out when she entered through the back door. Then he noticed her expression. "You okay, sugar?" "Just tired," Kendra said, tying her apron with practiced movements. "Hey, Lou, would you mind if I took my break first thing today? I have a situation to handle." Lou's eyes crinkled knowingly. Would this situation be about 6'2", wearing expensive suits and looking at you like you hung the moon? Heat rushed to Kendra's face. "It's not like that." "Sure it ain't." Lou turned back to his grill, but not before Kendra caught his smile. "Take all the time you need." Jonas arrived exactly at 6, looking somehow immaculate despite the hour. His casual clothes, dark jeans and a light grey sweater, probably cost more than Kendra's monthly rent, but they made him look almost human. "Coffee?" Kendra asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please." He looked exhausted up close, like he hadn't slept at all. "Black." She poured 2 cups and slid into the booth across from him. The diner was empty except for Mr. Peterson, a regular who was more interested in his crossword puzzle than their conversation. "Garrett's been calling people," Jonas said without preamble, "suggesting things about us, about you." Kendra wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, letting the warmth steady her. "What kinds of things?" "That you're after my money. That this is all a scheme to get close to my father's estate." Jonas's voice was tight with anger. "That I'm not thinking clearly because of my father's condition." "And what do you think?" Jonas looked up sharply. "What? Do you think I'm after your money?" Kendra kept her voice neutral even as her heart raced. "That I'm trying to take advantage of your father's illness." "Don't be ridiculous." The words came out harsh, defensive, then softer. "You won't even let me buy you clothes." A small smile tugged at Kendra's lips. The horror. "This isn't funny, Kendra." Jonas ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Garrett has influence. People listen to him. Let them listen." Kendra reached across the table and took his hand. Not for show this time, but because he looked like he needed it. "The best defense against lies is truth." Jonas stared at their joined hands. "But this is a lie. Parts of it are." Kendra squeezed his fingers gently. "But not all of it. Not anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with things neither of them was ready to name. Finally, Jonas spoke. "You should quit." "The diner?" "Your job, all of it." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Move in with me. It would look more convincing and you wouldn't have to—" "To what?" Kendra withdrew her hand. "Work? Be independent? Have something that's mine?" "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" The first customers were starting to trickle in. Kendra lowered her voice. "I'm not ashamed of what I do, Jonas. And if you are, then maybe Garrett's right about one thing. Maybe you're not thinking clearly." Jonas looked stricken. "Kendra, order up!" Lou's voice boomed from the kitchen. "I have to work." Kendra stood, smoothing her apron. "Sunday dinner is still on, but don't ever ask me to quit my job again." She turned to leave, but Jonas caught her wrist. His touch was gentle, almost pleading. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I want to protect you." "I don't need protection." Kendra looked down at him, at this powerful man who suddenly seemed lost in her world. "I need respect." The morning rush kept her busy for the next few hours, but she was acutely aware of Jonas's presence. He stayed, ordering more coffee, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. Around 9, an elderly couple came in, regulars who'd been coming to Lou's for decades. The wife was using a walker now, moving slowly, but her husband waited patiently, his hand on her back. The usual, Mrs. Green? Kendra asked, already reaching for the decaf pot. You're an angel, dear. Mrs. Green smiled, then noticed the ring. Oh, someone finally snatched you up? Kendra felt Jonas's eyes on her. Something like that. Lucky man, Mr. Green said, helping his wife into the booth. Martha, remember when we got engaged, right here in this diner 47 years ago? You spilled coffee all over yourself, Mrs. Green laughed. So nervous you were shaking. Best mistake I ever made. Mr. Green's eyes were soft with memory. Sometimes the best things in life start with a little mess. Kendra glanced at Jonas, found him watching the couple with an expression she'd never seen before, something between longing and fear. When her break came around again, she brought him a slice of apple pie without asking. You looked hungry, she said, sliding it in front of him. Jonas stared at the pie like it was a foreign object. I don't usually live a little, Rhodes. Kendra placed a fork beside his hand. Sometimes the best things in life start with a little mess. His eyes snapped to hers, recognition flickering across his face. Slowly, deliberately, he picked up the fork and took a bite. Well? Kendra asked, trying not to smile at his serious expression. It's... Jonas paused, considering. Actually incredible. Lou's secret recipe. Kendra started to walk away, then turned back. Jonas? I'm not quitting my job, but... She took a deep breath. Maybe we could have breakfast here sometimes, when you can't sleep, like before. The smile that spread across Jonas's face was small but real, the kind that reached his eyes and softened all his sharp edges. I'd like that. For the rest of her shift, Kendra felt Jonas's presence like a warm current in the air. He worked on his laptop, took calls in low voices, but his eyes found her whenever she passed. When she brought him the check, he'd left a $100 tip and a note. Thank you for the pie and the perspective, Jay. That evening, as Kendra soaked in her tiny bathtub, she thought about Mrs. Green's words about the best things, starting with a mess, about Jonas's face when he watched the elderly couple, about the way his hand had felt in hers, warm and real and anything but pretend. Her phone lit up with a text. Father asked if you're free for lunch tomorrow. Says he found some old photos of the garden he wants to show you. Kendra smiled despite herself. Tell him I'll be there. And Jonas? Yes. Bring pie. His response came quickly. As you wish. Kendra sank deeper into the cooling water, Claire's ring glinting in the bathroom light. 2 months and 1 week left in their contract. She wondered when exactly she'd started counting down with dread instead of relief. Outside her window, Atlanta hummed with late spring energy. Somewhere across the city, in a pristine penthouse with a view of everything, a man who couldn't cry at funerals was reading poetry and thinking about apple pie, and maybe, just maybe, that was a start. The Rhodes family photo albums were leather-bound and heavy with history. Harrison sat in his study, each breath a careful negotiation, but his eyes sparkled as he turned the pages. Here, he said, pointing to a faded photograph, Claire's first spring here. She transformed everything. Kendra leaned closer, taking in the image of a young woman with Jonas's eyes and a smile that seemed to leap off the page. She knelt in rich soil, her sleeves rolled up, hair escaping from a messy bun. Behind her, rose bushes climbed an ornate trellis. She's beautiful, Kendra said softly. Beautiful and stubborn. Harrison's laugh turned into a slight cough. The landscaper told her roses wouldn't grow in that spot. Too much shade, he said. She proved him wrong within a year. Jonas stood by the window, his back to them, but Kendra saw his reflection tense at his father's words. He'd been quiet since arriving with the promised pie, Lou's apple and a southern pecan that made Harrison's face light up. Jonas has her smile, Kendra said, watching both men's reactions. Though he doesn't show it often enough. Harrison's eyes crinkled. You're good for him, you know. He's different with you. More like father. Jonas's voice carried a warning. More like himself, Harrison finished firmly. The self he used to be before. Another coughing fit seized him. Worse this time. Jonas moved quickly, helping his father sit up, offering water with practiced ease. I'm fine, Harrison wheezed, waving them both off. Just need a moment. Kendra, dear, would you mind asking Marie for my afternoon medication? It was a transparent attempt to get her to leave the room, but Kendra played along. In the hallway, she paused, hearing Jonas's voice rise with unusual emotion. You need to rest. This excitement isn't good for... Don't tell me what's good for me. Harrison's voice was weak, but sharp. I'm dying, Jonas. We both know it. Let me enjoy what time I have left. Father, She reminds me of your mother, not in looks, but in spirit. That same light inside. Claire would have loved her. Silence fell, heavy and thick. Kendra forced herself to move, finding Marie the nurse in the kitchen. When she returned with the pills, both men had composed themselves, though Jonas's knuckles were white where he gripped the windowsill. "Thank you, dear." Harrison took his medication with practiced resignation. "Now, where were we?" "Ah, yes, the gardens. Did Jonas tell you about the fountain?" "No," Kendra said, settling back into her chair. "He hasn't. It was Claire's anniversary gift, our 10th year. She always said—" Harrison's voice trailed off, his eyes growing distant. "Perhaps we should let you rest," Jonas said quietly. But Harrison rallied, focusing on Kendra with sudden intensity. "Come, I want to show you something." Despite Jonas's protests, Harrison insisted on walking to the garden, leaning heavily on his cane. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and fresh-cut grass. The fountain stood in a sheltered corner, elegant marble, with water cascading over carved roses. Around it, real roses bloomed in shades of pink and cream, their perfume sweet and heavy in the afternoon heat. "Claire's favorites," Harrison said, touching a petal gently. "Sterling silver roses. The color changes with the light, sometimes pink, sometimes lavender. Like magic," she used to say. Kendra noticed a small plaque at the fountain's base, its brass surface weathered with age. "For Claire, because love, like roses, blooms sweetest in secret gardens." "Jonas designed it," Harrison said quietly. "Every detail. He was only 16. Kendra looked at Jonas, who had turned away, his profile sharp against the garden's softness. She could picture him then, a teenage boy channeling grief into perfect measurements and careful sketches, trying to capture his mother's memory in marble and water. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning more than just the fountain. Harrison squeezed her hand. "The roses still bloom, every year. Even after, well, some love stories don't end, do they? They just change shape." The moment was broken by Marie calling from the house. "Mr. Rhodes, time for your rest." "Always something," Harrison sighed. "Kendra, walk with me." Jonas started to protest, but Harrison waved him off. Let an old man have a moment with his future daughter-in-law. The walk back was slow, measured in careful steps. Near the door, Harrison paused. "You know," he said softly, "Jonas hasn't been out here since the funeral. Hasn't looked at those albums in years, but today—" He patted Kendra's hand where it supported his arm. "Thank you for that." "I didn't do anything," Kendra whispered. "You did everything." Harrison's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You made him look again. Sometimes that's all we need. Someone to help us see what's been there all along." Inside, Marie helped Harrison to his room for his afternoon rest. Jonas and Kendra stood in the foyer, the silence between them charged with unspoken things. "I should go," Kendra said finally. "My shift starts at 4. Jonas nodded, keys already in hand. But at the car he hesitated. "What my father said about the fountain. You don't have to explain. I want to." Jonas opened her door but didn't move to let her in. "After she died, everyone said time would help. That grief fades." But it didn't fade. It just changed shape. Kendra touched his arm gently, like the roses. Something broke in Jonas's expression. Without warning, he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She could feel his heart racing, his breath uneven against her neck. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he whispered. "Do what?" "Feel." Kendra wrapped her arms around him, holding him like she'd wanted to since that first dinner. He was solid and warm and shaking slightly, like a storm was breaking somewhere inside him. "Yes, you do," she said softly. "You never stopped. You just got very good at hiding it." They stood there, wrapped in each other, until Jonas's breathing steadied. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were dry but vulnerable. "I have a meeting," he said, his voice rough. "I'll pick you up Sunday?" "Yes." Kendra touched his cheek briefly, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Jonas?" "The roses are still blooming." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I know. I saw them today." "Really saw them?" The drive to the diner was quiet but not uncomfortable. At a red light, Jonas spoke without looking at her. "Father's birthday is next week. Small dinner, just family. Will you—" "Of course." Kendra watched the city blur past her window. "What should I bring?" "Just you." Jonas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That seems to be enough." Outside the diner, Kendra gathered her purse, ready to slip back into her regular life. But Jonas caught her hand before she could exit the car. "Kendra, Yes? Thank you. For today. He struggled with the words. For seeing me. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. Always. Inside, Lou took one look at her face and started making fresh coffee without being asked. Rough day, sugar? Kendra touched the ring on her finger, feeling its weight like an anchor. No, she said softly. Just real. The afternoon sun caught the diamond, sending little rainbows dancing across the counter. Somewhere across the city, a man who designed fountains for lost love was sitting in a corporate meeting, thinking about sterling silver roses and the way grief changes shape. And in 2 months it would all be over. Kendra had never hated a countdown more in her life. The kitchen in Jonas's penthouse was all sleek surfaces and professional-grade appliances that looked barely used. Kendra stood at the massive island, flour dusting her dark jeans, hair tied back in a silk scarf as she rolled out pie crust with practiced movements. You don't have to do this, Jonas said from the doorway, looking oddly casual in dark jeans and a grey Henley. We ordered catering. Your father mentioned loving his grandmother's peach pie. Kendra didn't look up from her work. Lou gave me her secret recipe, said it's close to old Southern style. Jonas moved closer, watching her hands work the dough. You're using my kitchen. Astute observation. Kendra smiled despite herself. Is that a problem? No, it's... He paused, and she could feel him struggling for words. Nice. It feels nice. The simple admission hung in the air between them. Kendra kept working, trying to ignore how domestic this felt. Her in his kitchen, him watching her with that soft expression he'd been wearing more often lately. Here, she held out a peach slice. Taste. Jonas hesitated, then let her place it in his mouth, her fingers brushing his lips. His eyes never left hers as he tasted the fruit. Perfect, he said softly, and Kendra wasn't sure if he meant the peach or something else entirely. The moment stretched, electric and dangerous until the oven timer broke the spell. Kendra turned away quickly, her heart racing. I should change before guests arrive, she said, wiping her hands on a towel. The pie needs another 20 minutes. Use my room, Jonas said, already reaching for his phone as it buzzed. I need to take this call anyway. His master bedroom was exactly what she'd expected. Minimalist, expensive, everything in perfect order, except there on the nightstand, just as he'd said, a worn copy of Frost's poems, a bookmark visible near the middle. Kendra changed into the dress she'd brought, emerald green, simple but elegant. As she was fastening her mother's necklace, she heard voices downstairs. Harrison had arrived. She found them in the living room. Harrison settled in an armchair while Jonas hovered nearby. The older man's face lit up when he saw her. Kendra, something smells wonderful. Just a small surprise, she said, bending to kiss his cheek. He looked better than last week, some color back in his face. You're spoiling me. Harrison squeezed her hand. Jonas, help me with that thing we discussed. Jonas frowned. What thing? The photo albums. From the study. Father, you shouldn't be carrying... Then you carry them. Harrison's tone brooked no argument. I want to show Kendra something before everyone arrives. Once they were alone, Harrison turned to her with surprising intensity. How are you, my dear? Really? The question caught her off guard. I'm fine. Why do you ask? Because I see the way you look at my son when you think no one's watching. Harrison's voice was gentle. And I see the way he looks at you when he thinks he can't be seen. Kendra's throat tightened. Mr. Rhodes. Harrison, he corrected softly. And please let me finish. I don't have as many words left as I'd like. She sat on the ottoman near his feet, her heart pounding. Jonas was always different after Claire died, Harrison continued. Controlled. Perfect. Like if he could just do everything right, he could keep more love from slipping away. He coughed slightly, waving off her concern. But lately, I see cracks in that perfection. Good cracks. Like light getting in. I don't know what you do. Harrison took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Whatever brought you two together, fate, chance, God's own sense of humor, it's real now, even if it didn't start that way. Kendra felt the blood drain from her face. You know? Harrison's smile was sad but kind. I've been in business 40 years, dear. I know a constructed narrative when I see one, but I also know real love when I see it grow. Does Jonas know that you... No, and he won't hear it from me. Harrison squeezed her hand. Some truths need to be discovered, not told. Footsteps on the stairs prevented further conversation. Jonas returned with 2 leather albums, looking suspicious at their intense expressions. Everything all right? Perfect, Harrison said cheerfully. Now, Kendra, let me show you Jonas's debate team photos. He had this unfortunate haircut, father, and these adorable glasses, father. The evening progressed with elegant ease. Harrison's sister Eleanor arrived with her husband, followed by Jonas's cousin Pierce and his wife. The catered dinner was perfect, but Harrison's face truly lit up when Kendra brought out the peach pie. "Just like Grandma Rose's," he declared after one bite, eyes misty. "How did you—" "Magic," Kendra winked, but she saw Jonas watching her with that intense expression again. After dinner, Harrison insisted on showing the photos, despite Jonas's protests. There he was at 10, serious even then, holding a science fair trophy. At 14, tall and awkward in a school play costume. At 18, giving his valedictorian speech, looking so much like his mother it hurt. "Oh, remember this?" Eleanor pointed to a photo of teenage Jonas in the garden, helping Claire with her roses. "He learned all the Latin names, remember? Just to make her smile." Jonas stood abruptly. "Anyone need coffee?" "I'll help," Kendra said, following him to the kitchen. She found him gripping the counter, shoulders tight with tension. "Hey," she touched his back gently. "You okay?" "I can't." He turned to face her, his expression raw. "I can't do this anymore." "Do what?" "Pretend." His voice was rough. "Pretend this isn't—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "Do you know what my father said to me yesterday?" Kendra's heart stuttered. "What?" "He said he can die happy now, knowing I've found what he and my mother had." Jonas laughed, but it sounded painful. "And the worst part?" "The absolute worst part is—" A crash from the living room cut him off. They rushed back to find Harrison on the floor, Eleanor kneeling beside him. "Call an ambulance," Jonas barked, already moving to his father's side. Dad, can you hear me?" Harrison's eyes fluttered. "Just dizzy." The next hour was a blur of paramedics and questions. Jonas rode in the ambulance while Kendra followed in her car, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. At the hospital they waited. Jonas paced the pristine hallway while Kendra tried to get him to sit, to breathe, to drink the terrible coffee she'd found. Finally, a doctor emerged. "He's stable. The medication needs adjusting, but he's asking for you both." Harrison looked small in the hospital bed, but his eyes were clear. "Well, this wasn't quite how I planned to end my birthday." "Father," Jonas's voice cracked. "Oh, hush, I'm fine." Harrison reached for both their hands. "But since I have you here, Jonas, do you remember what your mother always said about wasting time?" Jonas went very still. "Life's too short for walls we build ourselves." "Exactly." Harrison's grip tightened. "Don't waste any more time, son. Not for my sake. Not for anyone's." Later, in the hospital parking lot, Jonas stopped Kendra before she could reach her car. "Stay tonight," he said quietly. "Please. I can't be alone in that apartment with those albums and her roses and—" "Okay," Kendra whispered. "Okay." In his penthouse, with the city glittering below them, Jonas finally broke. He cried like a dam bursting, like 17 years of tears finally finding their way out. Kendra held him on the expensive couch, her dress getting wrinkled, his body shaking against hers. "I'm here," she murmured into his hair. "I'm right here." When the storm passed, Jonas looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Kendra?" "Yes." "What's the worst part?" "What?" "Earlier, I started to say the worst part was—" He touched her face with trembling fingers. "The worst part is that it's not pretend anymore, not for me." Kendra's heart stopped, then started again with painful clarity. "Jonas, I know we have a contract." His voice was hoarse. "I know this has an expiration date, but I need you to know. I need you to understand that I—" Kendra pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't, please, not tonight." Because if he said it, if he put words to this thing growing between them, there would be no going back. And they still had 6 weeks left of lies to tell. Jonas nodded slowly, understanding, but when she started to move away, he caught her hand. "Stay," he whispered. "Just stay." So she did. They fell asleep on the couch, fully dressed, his head in her lap, her fingers in his hair. Outside, Atlanta hummed with night traffic and distant thunder. Inside, 2 people who had started with a contract found themselves tangled in something far more dangerous: the truth. Morning crept into Jonas's penthouse like a guilty secret. Kendra woke slowly, her neck stiff from sleeping on the couch, to find Jonas watching her. He'd made coffee. She could smell it, but hadn't moved from where he sat on the floor beside her, as if afraid any movement might shatter whatever fragile thing had formed between them last night. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." His voice was rough with sleep and remnants of tears. "I called the hospital. Father's doing better." Kendra sat up, trying to smooth her wrinkled dress. Good, that's good. And I called Lou. Jonas handed her a coffee mug. She recognized it as the one she'd started keeping at his place for their morning meetings. Told him you'd be late. You called my boss? I told him you were helping with a family emergency. Jonas's eyes met hers. Was that wrong? The word family hung between them, heavy with implication. Kendra took a sip of coffee to hide her expression. He'd made it exactly how she liked it. Splash of cream, no sugar. No, she said finally. Not wrong, just complicated? Yeah. Jonas stood, offering his hand to help her up. You should shower, I had some clothes delivered. Jonas, just basics, for emergencies. He gestured to a discreet shopping bag by the stairs. The bathroom's stocked too. Everything I thought you might need. Kendra took the bag, her throat tight. Inside were simple, expensive basics in exactly her size. Yoga pants, soft t-shirts, underwear still in their packaging. In the bathroom, she found her preferred shampoo, her brand of face wash, even the specific curl cream she used. The intimacy of it, of Jonas knowing these details, preparing for her presence in his space, made her hands shake as she showered. When she emerged, dressed in the impossibly soft clothes, she found Jonas on his balcony, phone pressed to his ear. Just some routine tests, he was saying. No, Uncle James, you don't need to fly in. Father's fine. Yes, Kendra's here with me. He caught her eye through the glass, his expression softening. Yes, she's been... I don't know what I'd do without her. Kendra's heart clenched. She turned away, busying herself with making more coffee. But Jonas followed her inside, ending his call. The board wants to postpone today's merger meeting, he said, watching her move around his kitchen like she belonged there. Given everything with father, that's understandable. They said family should come first. Jonas's voice was careful. That's what everyone keeps saying, family first. Kendra set down the coffee pot with more force than necessary. Jonas, I know. He held up his hands. I know we can't, that this isn't, I know. 5 weeks, she whispered. 5 weeks left on the contract. Right. Jonas ran a hand through his hair. The contract. His phone buzzed again. Another call about Harrison. Another reminder of the real world waiting outside this moment. Go, Kendra said softly. Handle what you need to handle. I'll head to work. Have dinner with me tonight. Jonas, please. He stepped closer, into her space. Not as part of the contract. Not for show. Just dinner. You and me. Kendra could feel the heat of him, smell his expensive soap and something underneath that was just him. That would be a mistake. Probably. His hand found her waist, fingers spreading against the soft fabric. Say yes anyway. Mister Rhodes? A new voice. The doorman through the intercom. Your sister's here. Jonas closed his eyes briefly, fingers tightening on Kendra's waist before letting go. Send her up. Eleanor arrived in a whirlwind of designer perfume and worry, barely noticing Kendra's presence as she peppered Jonas with questions about Harrison's condition. I'm heading to work, Kendra said quietly, gathering her things. Call me if anything changes. Jonas caught her at the door while Eleanor was in the bathroom. Tonight? Kendra meant to say no, meant to be sensible, meant to remember the contract and the countdown and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, she said, 8 o'clock. You know where to find me. The diner was busy when she arrived, but Lou took one look at her face and pulled her into his office. Talk to me, sugar. Kendra sank into his worn leather chair. I'm in trouble, Lou. The kind with lawyers or the kind with hearts? Both. She twisted Claire's ring on her finger. What do you do when a lie becomes true? Lou was quiet for a moment, his big hands folded on his desk. You remember the Greens? How they got engaged? Right here, 47 years ago. What most folks don't know is that it started as a bet. Lou's eyes crinkled. His buddy bet him he couldn't get Martha to agree to one date, but somewhere between the coffee and the pie, it became real, Kendra finished softly. Sometimes the best things in life don't start the way we expect. Lou patted her hand. But that doesn't make them any less true. The day passed in a blur of orders and coffee refills. Around 6, Harrison's nurse, Marie, came in. He's asking for you, she said simply. Says he has something important to tell you. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Harrison looked better than yesterday, sitting up and alert. My dear girl, he said warmly. Come sit. Kendra perched on the edge of his bed. How are you feeling? Like an old man who's lived exactly as long as he was meant to. Harrison's eyes were clear and knowing. Which is why we need to talk about Jonas. Mr. Rhodes. Harrison, he corrected automatically. And please let me finish. Jonas came to see me this morning after you left. Kendra's heart stuttered. Oh? He asked me about his mother, about how we knew it was real. Harrison's hand found hers. Do you know what I told him? She shook her head. I said that real love isn't about knowing. It's about choosing. Every day we choose to stay, to try, to believe. Claire and I, we chose each other through good times and bad, through gardens that bloomed and winters that felt endless. Why are you telling me this? Because in 5 weeks, you have a choice to make. Harrison's grip tightened, and so does he. Kendra's eyes filled with tears. You knew this whole time. I knew it started as something else, but I also know what I see now. Harrison smiled gently. The question is, what do you see? Before she could answer, Jonas appeared in the doorway. He looked between them, frowning slightly. Everything okay? Perfect timing, Harrison said cheerfully. I was just telling Kendra about the time your mother replanted the entire rose garden in the middle of the night because the landscaper said it couldn't be done. Father, you need rest. What I need is for my son to be happy. Harrison's voice carried surprising strength. Really happy, not just playing at it. Jonas went very still. What does that mean? It means I'm tired, and you two should go enjoy your evening. Harrison squeezed Kendra's hand one last time. Remember what I said, dear, about choices. Outside the hospital, the summer evening was heavy with unspoken words. Jonas walked Kendra to her car, close enough that their hands brushed with each step. Still on for dinner? He asked quietly. Kendra thought about Harrison's words about choices, about Lou's story of the greens, about the way Jonas had watched her sleep this morning, like she was something precious he was afraid to lose. Yes, she said softly. Still on. His smile was quick but real. 8 o'clock. Jonas? She caught his hand before he could turn away. No fancy restaurants, no performances, just us. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or fear. Us, he repeated. Okay. Kendra drove home in a daze, Harrison's words echoing in her mind. 5 weeks left on their contract. 5 weeks until they had to choose, keep pretending this was just business, or admit that somewhere between the lies and the truth, they'd built something real, and neither option felt like winning anymore. 8 o'clock found Kendra closing up Lou's diner, her hands shaking slightly as she counted the register. She'd changed into a simple sundress, cornflower blue, nothing fancy, and let her curls fall loose around her shoulders. No makeup except a touch of lip gloss. No pretense. The bell above the door chimed. Jonas stood there in dark jeans and a white button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking more undone than she'd ever seen him. You're early, she said softly. Actually, he moved further into the diner. I'm right on time. I thought maybe we could stay here. Kendra blinked. Here? Where we met? Where this all started? Jonas ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd come to know well. Unless you'd rather... No, Kendra cut in. Here is perfect. She locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and led Jonas to what had become his usual booth by the window. The evening light painted everything gold, making the familiar space feel somehow magical. I can make coffee, she offered. Let me. Jonas was already standing, moving toward the counter with surprising confidence. I've watched you do it enough times. Kendra sat in the booth, watching as Jonas navigated her world, grinding beans, measuring water, moving with the same precision he brought to everything. But there was something else, too, something almost tender in the way he prepared her cup exactly how she liked it. Here, he slid into the booth across from her, placing their cups between them. How'd I do? Kendra took a sip. Perfect, of course. When did you start paying such close attention to how you take your coffee? Jonas's eyes met hers over the rim of his cup. Or to everything else about you? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Before she could respond, Jonas reached into his messenger bag. I brought something. He pulled out a familiar leather-bound book. I thought, maybe you'd want to hear which poem I've been reading. Kendra's heart stuttered. Jonas. He opened the book to a marked page, his voice soft in the quiet diner. The heart can think of no devotion greater than being shore to the ocean, holding the curve of one position, counting an endless repetition. His eyes found hers again. It's called Devotion by Frost. Jonas? Kendra's voice was barely a whisper. What are we doing? Having coffee. But his hand found hers across the table. Reading poetry. Being real. We can't. Why not? Because in 4 weeks this ends. Kendra's fingers tightened around his despite her words. Because your father is sick and you're vulnerable and I'm... You're what? I'm scared. The admission fell between them like shattered glass. I'm scared because this started as a lie, but now I can't remember how to pretend anymore. Jonas's thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. Then don't. It's not that simple. It could be. He leaned forward, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek. We could tear up the contract right now, start over, no pretense, no timeline, no... The diner's phone rang, shattering the moment. Kendra recognized the hospital's number on the caller ID. Harrison? She asked, already knowing. Jonas's face went pale. We need to go. Now. The drive to the hospital was a blur. In the elevator, Jonas grabbed Kendra's hand like a lifeline. She could feel him trembling. Harrison's room was crowded with medical staff when they arrived. Through the chaos, his voice rang out. Where's my son? Where's Kendra? They pushed through to his bedside. Harrison's face was grey, but his eyes were clear as he looked between them. Good, he wheezed. You're together. That's good. Father, don't... Hush, Jonas, listen. Harrison's hand found theirs, joining them together. The roses. They need pruning. In the spring. Don't let them get wild like I did. You can tell us about the roses tomorrow. Jonas's voice cracked. After you rest. No more tomorrow, son. Harrison's grip tightened. But that's okay. I've seen what I needed to see. Dad, please! Love her, Jonas. Harrison's eyes were fierce now. Not because I asked. Not because of any contract. Love her because she makes you real again. Jonas went very still. Kendra felt tears sliding down her face. How long? She whispered. How long have you known? Harrison's smile was gentle. Since the first dinner. The way you looked at him. No one pretends that well. Father, I'm tired now. Harrison's eyes were starting to drift. But remember what your mother always said. Life's too short for walls we build ourselves. Jonas finished, his voice rough with tears. Exactly. Harrison's grip loosened. The roses. Don't forget the roses. The monitors started beeping faster. Medical staff rushed in, pushing them back. Jonas stood frozen, watching as they worked on his father. Mr. Rhodes? A doctor approached them minutes later. I'm so sorry. Kendra caught Jonas as his knees gave out. They sank to the floor together, his body racked with sobs while she held him, rocking gently, murmuring soft words she hoped he couldn't hear because they were too close to love, too close to truth. Hours later, they sat in Harrison's garden. The roses were silver in the moonlight, their perfume heavy in the summer air. Jonas hadn't spoken since leaving the hospital, but he hadn't let go of Kendra's hand either. He knew, Jonas said finally, his voice raw. This whole time, he knew it wasn't real. No, Kendra touched his face, turning it toward her. He knew it didn't start real, but he also knew what it became. And what did it become, Kendra? She looked at this man she'd agreed to pretend to love, this complex, broken, beautiful man who'd somehow stolen her heart without either of them noticing. Everything, she whispered. It became everything. Jonas's breath caught. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her left hand where his mother's ring still sat. The contract, he said softly. We still have 4 weeks. Jonas? No. His voice was stronger now. I don't want 4 more weeks of pretending. I don't want any more contracts or timelines or careful lies. His fingers traced the ring. I want this to be real. I want you to wear this ring because you choose to, not because we agreed to it. What are you saying? I'm saying... Jonas took a shaky breath. I'm saying I love you. Not for my father, not for appearance, not for any reason except that you make me feel alive again. You make me want to read poetry and drink diner coffee and believe in things I thought I'd lost forever. Kendra's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Jonas, my father just gave us his blessing. Jonas pressed his forehead to hers. His real blessing, not the one we thought we needed. And he was right. Life's too short for walls we build ourselves. In the garden where his mother had grown impossible roses, where his father had found peace in his final moments, Jonas Rhodes finally stopped pretending. And Kendra, who had spent 3 months learning to lie, found she could only tell the truth. I love you too. The contract lay forgotten in Jonas's jacket pocket as they held each other under the summer stars, surrounded by sterling silver roses that bloomed despite all odds, just like the love that had grown between them, unexpected, unplanned, and absolutely real. 3 months later, The autumn rain turned Lou's diner's windows into watercolor paintings, just like the night that had started everything. Kendra moved between tables with practiced grace, coffee pot in hand, Claire's ring catching the light with each pour. The bell above the door chimed. "We're closing in 10, she called without looking up. "Even for me." Kendra turned to find Jonas standing there, raindrops glistening in his hair, a familiar worn poetry book tucked under his arm. He looked different now, still impeccable in his suit, but softer somehow, more human. "Especially for you," she teased, but her smile gave her away. "So you're late." Board meeting ran long. He crossed to her, kissing her softly. "But I wouldn't miss this." "Miss what?" Mr. Peterson called from his usual booth. "Your weird little anniversary thing?" "Exactly that, sir." Jonas took the coffee pot from Kendra's hands, setting it down. "Do you mind if we close up a few minutes early?" Mr. Peterson gathered his crossword puzzle with a knowing smile. "About time. Been watching you two dance around each other for a year now." After he left, Kendra locked the door and turned to Jonas. "A year, can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday." Jonas pulled her close, swaying slightly. "Sometimes it feels like I've loved you my whole life." Smooth talker. But Kendra melted into him, breathing in that familiar sandalwood scent. "How is the garden today?" "Blooming." Jonas's voice softened. "The sterling silvers are especially beautiful this year. Dad would have loved it." They had spent the summer restoring Claire's garden, learning its rhythms, understanding why Harrison had found such peace there. Jonas had insisted on doing the work himself. No landscapers, no shortcuts, just him and Kendra, dirt under their nails, learning how to make things grow. "Speaking of the garden," Jonas said, pulling back slightly, "I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, expensive cream paper, her name written in his precise handwriting. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a single sheet of paper. Kendra recognized it immediately, their original contract, now worn and coffee-stained, but across it in bold red ink was written, "Void, replaced by truth." "Turn it over," Jonas whispered. On the back was a new contract, handwritten in Jonas's elegant script. "I, Jonas Rhodes, hereby promise to love Kendra Lowell completely, honestly, and without reservation, drink diner coffee, even when there's perfectly good espresso at home, read poetry out loud on Sunday mornings. Never forget that the best things in life start with a little mess. Choose her every day, in every way, for all the days we have terms, lifetime, with option for eternity, payment. One heart, slightly damaged, but healing. Conditions. Must be real, always." Kendra's vision blurred with tears. "Jonas, wait." He took a deep breath. "There's more." From his other pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Not the vintage blue one that had held Claire's ring, but a new one, deep green. "I'm not getting on one knee," he said softly, "because this isn't a performance. This is just us, in the place where it all began, being real." He opened the box to reveal a delicate band studded with tiny diamonds, designed to nest perfectly against Claire's ring. "Kendra Lowell," Jonas's voice was rough with emotion, "will you marry me? Not for show, not for anyone else, just for us. Just because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that some contracts are meant to be broken and some lies are meant to become truth." Kendra touched his face, feeling the slight tremor in his jaw. "You know, most people just say, 'Will you marry me?' When have we ever done anything like most people?" She laughed through her tears. "True. Is that your answer?" "No." Kendra smiled at his startled expression. "This is my answer." She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. All the love, all the truth, all the beautiful mess they'd created together. When they finally parted, Jonas pressed his forehead to hers. "I need verbal confirmation," he murmured. "For the contract." "Yes." Kendra laughed. "Yes, I will marry you, for us, for real." Jonas slid the new ring onto her finger, nestling it against Claire's. The two pieces fit together perfectly, like they were always meant to find each other. "I have something for you too," Kendra said, moving to the counter. She returned with a familiar pie box. "Open it." Inside wasn't their usual apple or peach, but a small rose-shaped cake, decorated with sterling silver fondant petals. "How did you—" "Lou's been teaching me." Kendra touched his cheek. "For the days when we need a little magic." Jonas pulled her close again, swaying to music only they could hear. Outside, the rain continued to paint the windows, turning Atlanta into a watercolor dream. "Speaking of Lou," Jonas said after a moment, "when are we telling him this was all a contract in the first place?" "Never," Kendra grinned. Let him keep thinking he witnessed a real-life romance novel. But it was real, Jonas insisted. Maybe not at first, but love like roses blooms sweetest in secret gardens? Exactly, Jonas smiled, that real unguarded smile that still made her heart skip. Though I think we need to update that saying. Oh? Love, like roses, blooms sweetest in diners at midnight over cold coffee and broken contracts. Kendra laughed. That's terrible poetry. I'm still learning. Jonas kissed her softly. We have time. Later that night they sat in Claire's garden, surrounded by roses that bloomed despite the autumn chill. Jonas read Frost while Kendra rested against his chest, both rings glinting in the moonlight. Do you think they knew, she asked quietly, your parents, that sometimes the best love stories start with a lie? Jonas was quiet for a moment. I think they knew that real love isn't about how it starts. It's about how it grows, how it changes shape, how it blooms even when the world says it shouldn't. Above them the clouds parted, revealing a sky full of stars. Somewhere, Kendra thought, Harrison and Claire were smiling, and in her pocket the new contract crinkled. Not a binding document anymore, but a promise, a choice, a truth, just like them. 1 year later, the sterling silver roses were in full bloom, their petals shifting from pearl to lavender in the late afternoon light. Kendra stood in Claire's garden, her garden now, she supposed, carefully pruning the newest shoots. Her engagement ring and wedding band caught the sunlight, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the leaves. You're doing it wrong. Kendra smiled without turning around. Am I now? Completely wrong. Jonas's arms slipped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. The angle should be 45 degrees, according to the very expensive gardening book I bought. Funny, Kendra leaned back against him, because Marie told me your mother used to say gardening books were just suggestions, that the roses tell you how they want to be cut. Jonas was quiet for a moment. You've been talking to Dad's nurse about Mom? Every week. Kendra turned in his arms. She has the best stories, like how your mother used to sing to the roses during thunderstorms, or how she'd leave little love notes for your father hidden in the garden. Something shifted in Jonas's expression, that soft, vulnerable look that still made her heart skip. I didn't know that. There's a lot we're still learning. Kendra touched his face, thumb tracing his jaw. That's the beauty of it. Inside the house, their house now, since Jonas couldn't bear to sell his childhood home, voices and laughter spilled from the kitchen. Their weekly Sunday dinner tradition had grown. Lou came regularly now, teaching Kendra new recipes while telling embarrassing stories about her early waitressing days. The Greens often joined them, their 48 years of marriage a testament to love's endurance. Even Eleanor and her husband had become regulars, slowly healing the family bonds that grief had strained. We should head in, Jonas said, but made no move to let her go. Lou's teaching you Grandma Rose's chocolate pie recipe today, remember? 5 more minutes. Kendra breathed in the rose-scented air. I love it here. It feels like home? Magic. Jonas smiled, that real, unguarded smile that had become more frequent over the past year. Speaking of magic, did you check the mail today? Yes, and before you ask, your poetry subscription arrived. Kendra poked his chest playfully. Though I still can't believe you actually signed up for Poet of the Month. Hey, I'm cultivating culture here. You're such a nerd. Your nerd, always. The word hung between them, sweet and certain. Jonas's hand found the small of her back, pulling her closer. Have you told them yet? He murmured against her hair. Kendra's hand drifted to her stomach, still flat, but holding their newest secret. Not yet. I thought maybe tonight during dinner. Lou's been suspicious ever since I stopped drinking coffee. He's perceptive, our Lou. Our Lou, Kendra repeated softly. You know, sometimes I wonder what he'd say if he knew how we really started. The contract, the pretense. He'd probably say what he always says, sometimes the best things in life don't start the way we expect. From inside, Lou's voice boomed, You two lovebirds better not be letting my pie crust get warm. Coming, Kendra called back, but Jonas caught her hand before she could move. Wait. He pulled a slightly crumpled envelope from his pocket. I have something for you first. Inside was a sheet of paper, not a contract this time, but a poem. Jonas's handwriting was careful, deliberate. For my wife in the garden. Where once we built our walls with careful lies, now truth blooms wild, like roses climbing high. Each petal holds a promise, sweet and clear, that love grows strongest when we face our fears. You taught me how to feel, to bend, to bloom, to find light, breaking through my darkest rooms. Thin diner coffee and in garden soil, our love took root despite our best-laid foils. So let the roses grow however they please. Some things can't be contained by guarantees. Like us, they bloom in their own time and way, finding beauty in the mess of every day. No contracts bind us now, no terms to meet, just morning kisses and your smile so sweet. In you, I found what I was searching for, a love that makes me real, and then much more. Jonas. Kendra's eyes filled with tears. I know it's not frost, he said quickly, but I thought, Jan, for the baby's room maybe. We could frame it along with the original contract, show them someday how our story began. Kendra kissed him then, tasting salt and sweetness and everything they'd become together. When they parted, she whispered against his lips, It's perfect. You're perfect. Far from it. Jonas pressed his hand to her stomach. But I'm trying. Every day I'm trying. Time to come inside, you two, Lou called again. These pies won't bake themselves. Hand in hand, they walked back to the house that had become their home. Through the kitchen windows, they could see their found family. Lou gesturing dramatically over pie dough, the Greens sharing shy smiles across the table, Eleanor arranging flowers in Claire's favorite vase. Hey, Jonas said softly, pausing at the door. Do you ever regret it? Signing that first contract? Kendra looked at him. This man who had learned to love through poetry and pie, who still brought her diner coffee in bed every morning, who was going to be the most wonderfully imperfect father. Never, she said. Some contracts are meant to be broken. And some lies? Some lies are meant to become the truest things we know. Inside, their family waited. Outside, the roses bloomed in their own wild way, just as Claire had always intended. And somewhere, Kendra thought, Harrison was smiling, knowing that sometimes the best love stories start with a contract, but end with something far more powerful. The simple, messy, beautiful truth of choosing each other every single day. 6 months later, the nursery walls were painted the exact color of sterling silver roses in twilight. Above the crib hung 2 frames, the original contract, its coffee stains and red void stamp telling the beginning of their story, and Jonas's poem promising its continuation. In the garden, new roses were taking root, planted by their extended family in celebration of the little one on the way. Lou had insisted on planting a sweetness variety, claiming its pale pink blooms would match the baby's cheeks. The Greens had chosen peace roses, because every garden needed serenity. Eleanor had selected memory roses in honor of Harrison and Claire, and in the center, Jonas and Kendra had planted a new variety, New Dawn roses, which bloomed continuously from spring through fall, defying the usual seasons and limitations. Just like love when it's real, just like them. If you had to choose between true love and a perfect contract, what would your decision be? Have you ever had to choose between following your heart or keeping up appearances? What was it like dealing with that choice? As Kendra and Jonas discovered, sometimes the best planned lies turn into the deepest truths we know. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever had a relationship that started in a totally unexpected way, but turned into something real and true? Tell us in the comments. Do you believe that true love can be born from a lie? Or that sometimes we need to wear masks until we're ready to show who we really are? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.